The high society is actively celebrating the return of the Light Dragon conquering team, while Griffith Nakia drinks alone. Romeo Roseberry enters the room and says that it is not proper for a hero to drink alone in a gloomy room, no matter how bad it is. But Griffith replies that alcohol won't make them forget all the hatred in their hearts, and immediately asks how the tracking of the magic is going. The Light Dragon's power has not yet been fully absorbed. Romeo asks to give him a little more time, to which Griffith says that this is nonsense, because they have been unsuccessfully searching for clues for many years. They are also looking for traces of the killer who took the life of that very man. Romeo just looks at the hero without saying a word. On the floor, he notices a suitcase containing a stuffed rabbit toy and immediately remembers everything once again. He starts to tremble, and immediately his shaking hand rises to take hold of the brooch. Calix puts a bandage on his face, covering his eyes. Sir Superion asks for one thing in case of trouble. He asks that even if nothing happens, that Calix contact him to tell him about any things that might require his help. Superion calls him a hero, who it was an honor to fight alongside on the team of conquerors of light dragons. The guy says that if the hero doesn't have a wife, he can introduce him to his niece, but Calix politely declines this offer. Superion gets into the carriage and asks him to take care of himself and be careful. Calix asks himself why he should save the world if he couldn't even save that special person. Oscar Hresvelg looks into space with a look full of bitterness and regret. He says he misses Rio Auraria very much. On the luxurious chair sits the same toy bunny in a bow that Oscar put there. The guy starts stroking him with his hand. Oscar makes a promise to find the one who killed Rio by picking up the toy. Despite everything, the guy wants to take revenge on the killer with his own hands. But initially, this story was completely different. A cheerful and loud seller persistently offered books about the team conquering the Light Dragon, containing a saga about heroes, an exclusive report from a journalist with attached portraits. People are actively buying these books with the saga of heroes for a pretty good price. The girl in the cloak begins to examine the contents of the book. The portraits of the characters turned out to be completely different from the real ones, and the descriptions were stupid. But they all nevertheless went through a lot to become the heroes who saved the world. The lady with sparkling turquoise eyes is very eager to meet them, like in the good old days. But at an unexpected moment, one of the heroes of the Light Dragon subjugation team takes out his sword while everyone else comes with him. Romeo Roseberry names this girl as Rio's killer. Griffith Nakia doesn't say a word, instead glaring at her. Even with a blindfold, Calix Asgard is a fearsome figure with his mastery of enormous swords. Oscar Hresvelg says he will never forgive her. The four of them surround a girl with very long ash-blonde hair, and Romeo brings a sword to her. Relia Auraria begins to try to justify herself as her tension and fear become more and more noticeable. A magical symbol appears on her hands, which are wrapped around magical chains. The truth cannot be revealed, because the one they know is the person with whom they share precious memories. He is no longer in this world. So should Relia Auraria herself die at the hands of her childhood friends, a memory of the sacred neutral zone of the Kreutz Nature Reserve. The children notice that one of them has fallen into the pond. It turned out that the drowned child was Crown Prince Rio, who couldn't even swim. Romeo Roseberry immediately runs to save him, trying to hold on to his hat, which could easily fly away. Oscar Hresvelg looks at everything that is happening with fear. Roseberry saves his friend and begins coughing himself, trying to get some air, as the priestess runs up to them. Romeo immediately tells her that there is too much water in the Crown Prince's lungs, and that she must act quickly. A woman uses a magic spell with a rune around her hand. Water begins to pour out of Rio's mouth as the spell takes effect. The lady says that despite the healing being in full swing, his body temperature is not rising. They are ordered to move the child to the ward and prepare hot water. But then Rio says he's okay, which scares them. The Crown Prince curls up and hugs himself, asking to be left alone. He keeps telling himself that everything is okay, even when he is left alone in the hot bath. Rio tells himself that nothing will happen while hugging himself. Nobody understood anything, so there is no reason to worry. You can rest in your bed. She is cold and in pain, and fatigue is tormenting her especially strongly this time. She recalls that she had already experienced something similar, because she was constantly in the hospital, could not do many different things, and because of this, she got tired of reading romantic novels. From this, she focused only on mobile games, which became a salvation in this difficult hour for her. The girl in the hospital entertained herself only by studying games and upgrading her characters and studying the plot. In one of these games, she found a way to cure the illness of a village girl. In games, everything was possible, and because of this, at least some entertainment could bring joy during the most difficult period in her life. There, everything could go as her soul desired, be it money or life, everything went as she wanted. It was completely different from her reality, which was the life of a terminally ill person, waiting for his end among boring days in a hospital ward. Mission after mission was completed in the games time after time, even though it was exciting and almost the only way to spend time in her situation. Her thoughts were filled with dreams of being reborn in some game where her life would become much more interesting. The time traveler remembers how much she wanted this, but now she looks at her reflection in the mirror with a nervous tremor. She begins to believe in the supernatural and mentally asks that the next time she is reborn, she will be a character with a more pleasant and easier fate. She was very angry and infuriated that she managed to be reborn, but still could not get into that cherished game that she dreamed about. This is the setting of a novella, one of the romantic novellas she read in her past life, but many of them are almost completely forgotten. But now her situation seemed extremely distressing to her, and all hope for a good and peaceful life disappeared in an instant. She was reincarnated as the character Relia Auraria, who was forced to hide her gender and play the role of an entirely different person, Crown Prince Rio Auraria. Immediately from the door, the call of the priestesses is heard, who failed to keep an eye on the youth. They are very concerned about the Crown Prince's condition, including because of their own guilt for what happened. Reo tells them that he is fine. He asks to leave him alone for a while longer, and if he needs their help, the Crown Prince will call them at that very moment. The time traveler is, to put it mildly, not delighted with this arrangement. She has a hard time living as a character, and is forced to hide almost absolutely everything about herself. But she understands that they are so worried, because if someone finds out about what happened to the Crown Prince, it will be a real catastrophe for the entire temple. She survived thanks to the priestesses who healed her with their holy powers. Little was written about the secondary character into whom the traveler was reborn in the original novel, and that makes it even harder. But on Relia's hand, there is a special mark that gives at least some hope for her significance, at least in this world. The girl reflects and gives in to grief that even this time her life will remain meaningless, in continuous anticipation of the inevitable death that has caused her terrible suffering. The current emperor at this point in the original novel's history of the Auraria Empire is Radios Auraria. His younger sister, Princess Iris, to the great regret of the entire empire, passed away. But during the last years of her life, Iris fell in love with a simple knight, for whom she was able to neglect everything, and gave birth to a daughter from him. This daughter was Relia Auraria, into whose body the time traveler has now been reborn. Her father is a commoner, and her mother died shortly after giving birth, unable to withstand the terrible strain and consequences due to her weak body, but due to the chaos and struggle for the throne, Relia was forgotten. After all this, the girl lived in a small tower on the outskirts of the castle, far from any society, in a frightening place. She had only tattered clothes and a frail body, with a few maids who themselves were not so happy with their situation, laughing at their wayward mistress. But the servants brought at least some food, which could not but please. Although it was terribly hard and unbearable from loneliness, it was her quiet life. At that moment, Relia lived her own life, and only her own, until Emperor Ridios appeared, forcing her to forget her previous life forever. Emperor Ridios blamed his sister for giving birth to a daughter, calling it a terribly stupid act. Radios Auraria, with obvious sarcasm and great displeasure, says that his now-deceased sister is a great girl, but the evil smile of a psychopath never leaves his face. The man asks the maids who else knows about the child, but the servants only answer that no one knows except him and themselves. He pulls Relia's hand by force, and this terribly frightens her and leads her into even greater despair than after the memories of her orphanhood and the insult to her mother. Emperor Auraria grabs her wrist with all his strength and tells her about the blood oath mark on her wrist. She was undoubtedly of royal lineage and was the same age as his son, the crown prince of the Rio Empire. The man uses the magic from her mark on her hand and kills all the maids who knew about her birth, her connection to the family, which causes a stupor in the lady who is too young for such a thing. She begins to turn these memories over in her head, in the distant past, On the continent of Draconea, a dragon awakened. But then 5 knights and the head of the church, Kreutz, defeated the dragon and saved the world. The 5 knights became heroes and founded their empires. The head of the church divided the dragon's magic and recognized the power of each royal family. One day, when the dragon awakens again, the knights swore a blood oath to answer the call of the Church of Kreutz to repeat their heroic deed once again. Many years have passed since then, but a few years ago, a new dragon egg appeared. It was indestructible, and dark magic bubbled around it and killed the knights who tried to destroy it. As a result, the most ferocious and terrifying monsters were awakened again, which caused general fear, panic, and anxiety in the face of a new danger. The Church of Kreutz gathered the 5 emperors in preparation for the day the egg would hatch, decreeing that the descendants of the emperors should be trained in their temple. Thus were born 5 children, one from each empire that had taken the oath many years before. The descendants of the heroes bearing the sign of the oath were called to the temple. Emperor Auraria cuts off a young girl's long hair with his sword in one swift and sharp motion, shouting insults towards the Kreutz church. He says that he cannot send his child, and especially his only son, to such a terrible place, in his words. This is becoming more and more shocking to the unprepared lady with each passing minute. From that terrifying moment on, she began to pretend to be the crown prince of Auraria. She would have to become Rio Auraria for the Kreutz church from that day on. After all this, the time traveler herself could not help but harbor the most terrible and furious anger and hatred towards the merciless emperor who sent her to the temple instead of the crown prince. But after her life with the horrible maids who would deliberately make her small portions of food after they had fed her well, she agreed to go to the temple. But she didn't really have much of a choice, which the girl sadly doesn't want to admit. Before living in the temple, she did not have the opportunity to live in good conditions with normal food, so now she needs to make up for all the missed opportunities. The time traveler begins to remember the plot that led to her character's fate. If everything goes according to the original plan, then after a life of suffering she will fall into the pond of the royal palace and die. Therefore, she is safe while she is in the temple. In addition, even if she wants to ask for help, she still cannot reveal her identity to Relia, which creates even more inconvenience and unnecessary problems. If she messes something up, the magic of the Emperor's golden word will be activated, and she will vomit blood at that very moment, and her body will die from this incredibly cruel and bloody magic. She doesn't find it funny at all that nothing significant has changed in her life compared to her past life, the fate of death, and life within the framework of history, which someone else has already decided. The girl is already starting to wind herself up that even this time, after rebirth, she will just have to quietly wait for her inevitable death and then quietly die. She is pleased with the advantage of knowing the further plot, which will be her guide and assistant, how and what should be corrected and what she should protect herself from. She is confident that she can save herself from death by drowning. All she has to do is avoid bodies of water. First, she must stay in the temple for 3 years. This will be her first serious and long test, and no one should know her true identity. The time traveler comes out of her room. She is full of confidence that doing all this will not be such a big problem. Romeo Roseberry looks at Rio from behind. There is childish resentment in his eyes, and his cheeks are puffed up with indignation. Such a return of the guy he saved certainly does not make him happy. There were many children in the Temple of Kreutz, in addition to the other 5 who bore the blood oath, so it became noisy quite early and quickly. The children of nobles from the most varied and distant countries were also gathered here, and continued to come further to live with their friends. According to the time traveler, they are doing all this to strengthen their ties, because one day they will all have to hunt the great dragon. Among the children, it was forbidden to show off their status. Sometimes they had to participate in events similar to sports festivals, but apart from them and prayers, they had free time. Compared to the environment she lived in before, this place is heavenly, and nothing can compare to a place where you can eat a lot of delicious food in the dining room every time. But other girls have a lot of complaints about the food in this place and the time it takes to get dressed in the morning, which surprises the newcomer. Passing girls share their impressions. Some washed their hair themselves for the first time, and some would like to take servants with them here. They all miss dresses, and the same uniform every day does not make them happy at all. The newcomer notes that she really likes wearing this uniform, and she thinks that these clothes are quite comfortable. She assumes this is because her previous clothes were just rags that could not even be fully called clothes. The children of the royal families remain in the temple in preparation for the hunt for the great dragon, but there was no record in the novel of them all getting along together. The reason for this was that this was far from the main place of the plot. In the original plot of the novel, they were mentioned only later in the form of rumors and gossip, and for 3 years there was neither male nor female. Relaya, who came here in place of Prince Reo, does not mention her stay here during the course of the story. The place where Relaya died is a pond in the imperial palace of the Auraria Empire, so the 3 years that the newcomer will have to spend here should be calm and safe. For now, we need to focus on living here for this long time. But the question is how Relaya could stumble like that, fall into the pond and die. Where was her mind all this time? But the time traveler is glad that at least the girl was not killed, or that no attempt was made on her life, but Romeo Roseberry, who saved her life, knocks the girl out of her thoughts. The blonde man asks with feigned interest and false politeness if Crown Prince Rio is okay. The girl doesn't understand how to behave better, especially on behalf of such a character, and therefore her cheeks simply turn red from embarrassment. Roseberry smiles wickedly and enjoys admiring his interlocutor, while his cheeks also turn red and his hand supports his face. The traveler jumps up in surprise, and the guy thinks that the crown prince is quite all right. The girl understands that in front of her is the one who saved her yesterday. She begins to remember that this boy was the main character in the original story, with a kind heart and a decent character. Roseberry is rude and tells the guy to say at least something and stop staring at him, asks if his mouth was sewn up, which brings the newcomer into the most terrible shock. Rio simply thanks him verbally, which saddens his savior. He expresses his indignation with just one dissatisfied look from his deep blue eyes. He rises and reaches closer, asking if all the crown prince can do is say thank you. The young man sarcastically asks if that's the only thing he's learned to say. The time traveler understands that she has definitely gotten herself into huge trouble and has very few possible ways out, if any, and her ideas about the main character have deteriorated to the point of being worse than ever. Rio is deeply disappointed in the main character of the novel, who is Romeo, and asks if he needs something from him. Roseberry asks to tell the priests that he simply came to the crown prince's room during morning prayers and fell asleep there from extreme fatigue. And most importantly, ask that no one dare wake him up or come into the room. The time traveler only sadly thinks that despite all his rudeness, she was genuinely interested in learning about his request, which turned out to be a simple desire for the guy to be covered up. Roseberry explains to him that Rio usually pretends to be a quiet and considerate person, and then this happens, but he is a prince, so if he says something like that, they will believe him. The crown prince agrees, and immediately the blonde's face becomes haughtily joyful and playfully friendly, and he himself begins to say that their communication is starting to go quite well. The guy looks incredibly dignified during meals, but his personality seems to be completely different from what he wants to appear to everyone, which creates misunderstandings. The traveler understands that she needs to eat normally for the entire 3 years of her stay here, because when she has to return to her homeland, she will have huge problems with nutrition. Roseberry notices the same symbol on Rio's hand as he has, which surprises him greatly, and their conversation immediately changes the topic to this common feature. The blonde says that he is very interested in whether this symbol is real, and therefore asks to show it, to which the time traveler once again agrees. Rio extends his hand so as to maintain distance, but so that his symbol on his hand is visible. Then Roseberry starts looking at his symbol, which was exactly the same, and says that everyone really has one like that. The traveler does not understand what suddenly happened that made each girl's face turn red, and an atmosphere of general excitement and anxious whispered conversations reign. The blonde starts clicking his tongue in irritation, while Rio is pleasantly surprised by the guy who came. Griffith Nakia came to the dining room to meet everyone. He is neat, reserved, and even very handsome. But Romeo Roseberry could not find a common language with him, and he immediately openly talks about his hatred for him, calling him pathetic and stupid, not embarrassed by anything at all. The two of them also notice the child in the distance of the dining room. His silver hair and red eyes make it clear that he is Oscar Hresvelg. Although he is older than the traveler, he seems smaller in appearance. She vividly recalls what his childhood was like, but now his appearance seems fragile and innocent, but later readers will call him a psychopath and a cruel emperor. Roseberry points to another child and speaks of hatred for him too. This child turns out to be the strong and brave Calix Asgard. Oscar has a seizure, covering his hands, falling against the wall, unable to even stand on his feet. The other children do not help him but simply move away, due to rumors about his demonic possession. The guy is just holding back his tears, trying with all his might to cope with all the horror himself. He is overcome by an attack and bitter tears begin to flow like a river down his cheeks, and he begins to sob loudly. In his visions, Oscar again sees a bloody sword. Drops of blood from the end of it flow into his eyes, turning them red as he is chided for looking away from his own mother's death. His eyes turn completely red and his tears seem to harden. The father says that his eyes are red because the blood of his murdered mother got on them and completely colored them. Otherwise, he wouldn't be the only one in this royal family with such grotesque eyes. Orcus Hresvelg was not prepared for this at such an early age, and memories of it tormented him time and time again. He was heaped with guilt for his mother's death in his very childhood, hatred for the color of his eyes, which changed in that very moment, and an endless feeling of guilt, calling him a terrible monster. But then the guy suddenly hears his own name being called, which only scares him more. His mother, in her last moment, spoke of how she was in terrible pain. She stretched out her hand to his face and asked him to save her. Through great agony and excruciating pain, the woman rose to her son, hugging his head, while behind her, 3 maids were already dead at the hands of the emperor. But suddenly Rio saves him with the power of his mark on his hand. He shouts at the same moment so that Oscar listens to him. The Crown Prince says that everything Oscar sees and hears is a lie, and now he needs to look into Rio's eyes and calm down. The time traveler tries with all her might to show him that all his hallucinations are only in his head, which really makes Oscar feel better. He starts looking at her, and not at the nightmares from his childhood. She holds it for complete immersion in reality and an exit from the illusions that the guy sees due to nerves and worries. Oscar begins to open his mouth to speak, but he cannot find the right words as tears stream down his cheeks from the joy of being saved by the noble heart of the Crown Prince. The priests watching over them immediately run up to them and call both boys. They examine Oscar, checking his condition. Rio remembers the words Romeo told him in the dining room, that he himself was already feeling better. But in the end, the traveler was also able to at least help someone else. Still, she remains as concerned about Oscar's condition as the priests. They carry him in their arms so that he can lie down and rest in his room. The time traveler remembers that Oscar's biological father, Emperor Hresvelg, killed dozens of people, including his mother, right before his eyes and declared his son a monster with bloody eyes. The Emperor's voice tormented Oscar his entire life, but just one phrase from the main character's lips, about the beauty of his eyes, allowed him to forget about his childhood and find salvation. The time traveler recalls how she noted this moment for herself in her past life when she read the original novella, but in this life she saw him right before her eyes in reality, when he was too small, thin, and very young. Although the meeting with Crown Prince Rio had happened much earlier, it was impossible to simply do nothing, since everything could continue to be so terrible that the attacks would not stop. Rio immediately runs up to the crowd and asks what they are doing here, and tells them to call the priests right away. There is strong excitement and anxiety in the eyes of the newcomer, which is evident in the sincerity of her desire and haste to help. She couldn't just turn a blind eye to it, and so she did it, even though she didn't want to interfere at all. But the same man brings her back from her thoughts to reality. Romeo Roseberry asks if Rio is a heretic. The Crown Prince asks if the blonde man has looked, but he does not help. Romeo immediately asks again with an arrogant and self-confident face whether he would help. He says that falling into a pond is completely different from what happened now, and his words upset the newcomer even more. Rio decides to walk away and not even continue this stupid conversation. The blonde starts to follow him to find out what kind of spell he cast, and Romeo's behavior infuriates the Crown Prince himself. He tells him that he simply calmed him down, and that it was an ordinary attack, but not a demon. In this world, the understanding of ordinary people was extremely limited, and therefore all suffering from something invisible was considered to be demonic forces that had captured a person. Once or twice no one would have noticed, but when the attacks began to recur over the course of 3 years that Oscar spent there, he began to be suspected of demonic possession. Such suspicions, even from the church itself, were most likely the true intentions of Emperor Hresvelg to tarnish Oscar's reputation and make another prince the heir. Rio says that demons do not exist, and Oscar sees illusions due to a traumatic event, comparing it to the nightmares that ordinary people like Romeo have. The Crown Prince explains to him that there are people who see nightmares while awake, and that this is a normal phenomenon. Roseberry can't believe it, telling the Crown Prince that his only argument has no basis whatsoever. He says that this cannot be so. Romeo keeps talking about how the Crown Prince lacks evidence. The time traveler begins to think that Romeo now seems terribly disgusting to her to the point of nausea. Even though he was so kind and gentle to the main character in the novel, does he really not understand the feelings of a man accused of being possessed by a demon, especially if he has similar scars? He asks her to continue telling the story, which greatly surprises the traveler, who at that moment was lost in her thoughts. Rio asks what he should continue telling him. Roseberry replies that he wants to hear about those people who have nightmares even when they are awake. He asks to explain it in a way that he can understand, asking to tell at least a little more, placing his hand on his heart. There is a thrill and excitement in his eyes, and one small tear runs down his cheek, which says a lot. The girl thinks that he must be curious to know more. After all, he is only a child now, and the human mind is very fragile. The Crown Prince points to his temple and speaks from what is inside their heads, which are very sensitive, unstable, and sophisticated, and explains the Prince of traumatic events. Roseberry asks what will happen as a result of all this. The Crown Prince replies that the shocking scene will repeat itself in the mind throughout life. To such an extent that it can be taken for reality, some sufferers commit suicide. Romeo immediately says that suicide is a great and terrible sin. To give one's soul to the devil is a betrayal of the Kreutz religion. His words about it being a sin echo in Rio's ears. The Crown Prince explains to him that there are people who can do nothing about it. He immediately replies that it is all because of their demonic possession. Rio says that it is not a demon, but such people suffer if they continue to be tormented. They cannot think sensibly. Such people believe that only death can stop them from suffering. But the time traveler understands why Romeo is so interested in demons. It is because of his mother, who committed suicide. And because he witnessed this scene as a child. Romeo's mother had another man she loved. Her parents did not approve of their relationship, so they married her off to the Emperor of the Roseberry Empire to gain immense power. At least it was some happiness that the Emperor sincerely tried to love her and treated her with dignity. He did not reproach her and waited patiently for her to open her heart to him. But there was still another man in her head, and her relationship with the Emperor remained distant and cold. The worried parents resorted to threats against their daughter and the man she loved, telling her to give birth to a crown prince if she wanted to save her true love. And so Romeo was born. Although the position of the Empress was secured, the parents continued to take advantage of her weakness, threatening the life of his beloved every time they had the opportunity. But one day, the man she loved committed suicide in his own cell, where he was forcibly sent by her own family. He knew that the Empress would continue to suffer as long as he lived, and he could not bear it any longer. Because of the enormous sense of guilt, the girl began to fall into a deep illness. Her condition gradually worsened, reaching hallucinations, illusions, and sleepwalking. Rumors that the Empress was possessed by a demon spread quickly, but she chose the same end as the man she loved, forgetting about her son altogether. The Empress did not even suspect that the very young Romeo would see all this. Everyone around was talking about the obsession of the former Empress, and her fate could at any moment befall Romeo himself, who was her son, because her demons could come to him. Romeo grew up in the love of his kind stepmother and father. He didn't have the hallucinations and delusions that Oscar had, but his wound was still there, especially his fear of demons and the people they possessed. In the original work, Roseberry confesses her feelings only to the main character, but the newcomer cannot pretend that she doesn't know. After all, one day his wound will heal, this moment will certainly come. Rio says that demons don't exist, which greatly shocks the still young Romeo. In order not to force him to change his opinion in an exclusively negative direction and turn his world upside down, he adds that he just thinks so. There are only people who hurt others, so there is no need to worry about demons that don't even exist. Romeo is silent and his cheeks turn red. He calls the crown prince a heretic, adding that this is exactly what he expected. Romeo says that no one would say such things. If he said such things to the elders, would he not be considered a heretic? The newcomer immediately realizes what she has just gotten herself into. If word spread that Crown Prince Auror was a heretic, the emperor could wring his neck right then and there without even thinking about what he was doing. Rio asks if Roseberry knows what will happen if someone finds out about his views, if he tells anyone about it. Romeo asks if he is threatening him, to which the Crown Prince grabs him by the collar with all his strength and pulls him down. Rio says that if he tells anyone about this, he will really kill him. He asks if Roseberry understood him. The blonde remains terrified and cannot say a single word. The time traveler continues to hold him, but in her thoughts she is also thinking about how best to show the new hierarchy between them. She pushes him away, throwing him away from her, and lets him go, remembering that in the future they will become a dragon-taming team. Rio orders him to be called Captain from now on. Romeo doesn't understand anything and is stupefied. He screams with indignation and unwillingness to obey, claiming that it was he who took advantage of someone else's weakness. Rio asks if he really plans to become his enemy and if Romeo is so sure about it. Roseberry immediately falls silent again. His cheeks turn red again, but he just tisks as his gaze wanders away. Romeo shouts that he won't tell anyone, but in return wants to know more about what their conversation was about. The Crown Prince asks him if the blonde wants to admit that people like Oscar are not possessed by demons. Roseberry silently agrees, his red cheeks again betraying his true feelings. He thanks the Crown Prince, calling him his captain, and the newcomer immediately breathes a sigh of relief. She had no plans to interfere, but it turned out that the hero who would defeat the dragon in the future became her subordinate. Oscar is asked to answer while he lies there, breathing heavily. He asks if it's true that Crown Prince Rio of the Auraria Empire hit him. He replies that it is true. The priests are immediately horrified and do not know how this could have happened. Oscar immediately starts saying that everything is not so. He immediately remembers that look, and the moment when his attack passed, only from those words that they were safe here. Oscar says that the kid was trying to help him. Romeo and Rio spend time together in their own way after drinking tea together. The time traveler wonders if it was a mistake to make the blonde her subordinate, since he came to her room to chat just one day later. Roseberry asks if the captain would like to read the comic book he is so into. She wonders if her subordinate is being too careless, but is surprised that there are comics in this world. The captain says that it seems that someone has arrived, to which Romeo replies that he understands everything. He complains that he had to stop at the most interesting moment. Along the way, while walking to the door, the young man complains in advance about the one who managed to come to them at such an inopportune time. The time traveler begins to think that the guy, on the contrary, is very similar to a subordinate, even too much so. Without opening his eyes, Roseberry assumes that it is the priests again, saying that there is still a lot of time before evening prayers. But he realized who was in front of him, and his gaze immediately became very stern. Romeo asks what the new guest needs, which interests the newcomer. At this point, Rio becomes embarrassed and excitement begins to appear on his face. It turns out to be Oscar Hresvelg. Roseberry is rude to a visiting guest, which makes his captain very angry. Rio reproaches and says that Romeo is from an imperial family, where he was taught to say such things if he was raised by good parents, and Oscar likes to look scared. The time traveler tells her subordinate not to scare the one who came here without a reason. The blonde immediately says with a heavy exhalation that he will stop, calling the Crown Prince captain, which delights the visiting guest. Rio asks why Oscar came to him, to which he replies, thanking him for his help during yesterday's attack. The captain says that there is no need to pay so much attention to such a thing, and there is no need to worry about it. The traveler's face shows melancholy from memories of yesterday. That day she thought for a long time before deciding to help, because she was going to pretend that she didn't notice it. But she feels very awkward when Oscar so kindly thanks her, so the time traveler asks if he is hungry and wants a snack, for which he again begins to thank Rio. The Crown Prince treats him to a cup of tea, thinking that he must make amends to him, even if Romeo was the one who said something rude. The blonde looked at them furtively and with great tension. He asks Oscar if the recent attack caused his stuttering. Rio immediately makes it clear with his outrageous scream that he is not going to tolerate this attitude. Oscar replies that he only does this when he is nervous or worried. Romeo begins to mimic him, for which the Crown Prince shouts at him at the top of his voice, ordering him to shut his mouth. Roseberry immediately shuts up and does not dare to start a conflict. He simply walks away, ignoring Rio's calls for him. The door closes with a very loud bang. The time traveler is furious that Romeo is only 10 now, but even so, he is still terribly stupid and scared Oscar so much. She exhales heavily and covers her face with her hands. Rio apologizes on behalf of Romeo Roseberry, saying that even if he doesn't look like it, the guy isn't as bad as his antics make him seem. It's hard to say, but he's not an evil person by nature, and Oscar replies that everything is fine. The guy says that it's not a lie or anything like that, which causes new shock and fear in Rio, to which the time traveler asks him again. Oscar says he has no friends, and he even stutters who could like such a person. The Crown Prince's eyes showed only emptiness and terrible grief for such a young man with such a tragic fate. She doesn't understand why such a young child takes such things for granted. It makes her heart ache. Rio says he wouldn't have helped him if he hated Oscar. Oscar asks if the Crown Prince would help him, even though he knew he stuttered. He answers loudly and with complete confidence, stroking his hand over his heart, that even so he would certainly help. Oscar, with red cheeks, thanks her again. The guy asks if he knows her name, surprised by this. He asks why the blonde calls him Captain, and this question surprises the newcomer. Rio says that Romeo started calling him that and respecting him after he saw how he helped him and calmed him down. Oscar asks if he can call him Captain too, which shocks him. He says that he also wants to call Rio his captain. The traveler immediately begins to get terribly worried and anxious. Suddenly, she remembers a scene from the original where Oscar avenges his murdered mother. He killed his father in revenge for the murder of his mother, telling his father that from now on, the whole world would fear him. The time traveler, with a trembling voice, begins to say that this nickname is too much, which upsets the guy whose face has changed. The guy asks if he can't call him that, if it's because of his behavior yesterday, which Rio immediately denies. He asks if this is not the case, then it is not because of his stuttering. The Crown Prince says that it is not because of that. The time traveler heard the captain and is now afraid that she might die, because her goal is simply to survive. Oscar's eyes begin to water and his cheeks turn red as he looks down. Rio immediately notices this and decides not to delay. The Crown Prince says that Oscar can call him whatever he wants. Oscar becomes very excited and immediately asks again if he really can, to which the Crown Prince answers yes, with even more confidence. Rio tells Oscar to call him whatever he wants at any time. A look of surprise suddenly appears on his face. Oscar admits that he is now very happy because he thought that he hated him too. This greatly confuses the newcomer, who is very much fascinated by him. There is an awkward pause between them. The guy gets worked up again and asks her if she likes him. The Crown Prince immediately says that this is not so, and he really likes Oscar. Oscar says he is very happy about it too. Rio becomes more and more embarrassed. The guy says that if the Crown Prince likes him, then that's enough. The traveler recalls that she was afraid that they would find out her true gender. But now that she sees it, Romeo and Oscar are both so beautiful to her that she was able to calm down a little. And Oscar seems to her to be comparable to a fairy in his beauty. The guy says that from now on he will count on him. He calls Rio Captain, which makes him blush even more and makes him feel very awkward. A small pack of wolves walks around a single mage who asks if he can really kill them. The girl answers the man that everything is really like that. He tells her that he will carry out the Emperor's order. Romeo suddenly sneaks up and asks if the captain slept well. His next question immediately became whether Rio was going to have breakfast and why he was going alone. The other children look at what is happening with confusion and excitement because the blonde starts shouting too loudly that he should have called him to go together. Suddenly, a confused Oscar runs up to them, saying that he has finally found them both. He asks the same question to him but looks more worried. They start making noise and arguing because of Oscar's desire to be closer to Rio, which attracts a lot of attention. Oscar replies to Romeo that he didn't ask him at all, which irritates him. They were too loud and it disrupted the atmosphere among the children. The time traveler couldn't understand how everything had happened and at what point everything had gone wrong, but she couldn't blame anyone else but herself. Romeo and Oscar, worried about the silence from their captain, decide to ask why he doesn't answer them at all, and if something happened that he doesn't want to tell them about. Rio remains silent as his cheeks flush again from embarrassment, but tells them that he's just a little hungry. Roseberry says he remembered something. He says that something will happen tonight, which surprises the captain. Romeo says that they were told that everyone should gather outside and do something. To get rid of the fear of demons, they must get rid of the fear of darkness. In the Church of Kreutz, there is a tradition whereby acolytes climb the mountain at midnight. They do this by developing teamwork and overcoming fears of demons, despite the small size of the mountain. For the children, it is a huge place, and for them a hut was built halfway up the mountain. As soon as the children arrive, they light a candle that cleanses them of demons and return. The priests say that the children will climb the mountain in pairs, face the fear of darkness with their comrades, and defeat the monsters that try to invade their hearts. But there is nothing to worry about. Priests climb this mountain every day, and only small animals live here, like rabbits and squirrels. Many are divided in their opinions and actively discuss all this, while the time traveler and her subordinates stand at a distance from the noisy crowd. Romeo immediately asks with shining eyes who the captain is going with. Rio replies that he will go alone, and the blonde goes with Oscar as a partner. Roseberry does not want to go with Oscar, who, on the contrary, is ready to do everything as the captain orders him. The guy replies that he is not afraid at all, to which the captain of the Trinity says that everything has been decided and they should find a common language. Romeo decides to ask Rio again if demons really don't exist. Rio says that he shouldn't be afraid, so he should think the same way, so that he can feel better. Oscar says that he has been of the same opinion for a long time, which makes their captain admire him and joyfully pats him on the head, which irritates Roseberry. The blonde immediately makes a displeased face. Rio asks what kind of expression he has on his face. Oscar looks very calm, but this is not surprising for the girl who has been transported, because she knows that his father is much more frightening to him than any invisible demon lurking in the darkness. Nightmares about which still tormented him, which the traveler knew very well. She understood him and looked at him with sorrow, although she wanted to say a lot, but she definitely could not do it. It was the same for her and for Relia. The darkness was always near her. Then she was most afraid of dying alone from hunger. The girl immediately remembered everything from the sight of Oscar, who reminded her of his grief. Once again, her gaze turned to her subordinates. They couldn't do without a quarrel, which is why she immediately began to think about the mistake of involving them in this. But she can no longer think of them as characters in a novel. The time traveler knows that she shouldn't interfere anymore if she wants to protect herself, but she simply can't stand by and watch the tragedy that unfolds tonight. This mountain is not safe tonight, not because of some demon, but because someone will intentionally release wild animals to harm the child. The priests hold chains with whistles hanging from them, which are used to signal for help in emergency situations. Even if she tells everyone about the attack, no one will believe her, and this will only increase the risk of being noticed by the perpetrator. The time traveler tells herself with complete readiness that she must somehow stop this. Griffith Nikia tells Calix Asgard that they should have reached the hut by now, but there is no hut, and they don't even see the other children. Calix asks him how they could have gotten lost if they had been walking along the same road all the time. Griffith replies that that's why it's strange, but he didn't pay attention and just blindly walked forward. Calix, holding a lantern in his hand, asks how he dares to call him inattentive. The guy immediately stumbles on the roots of a large tree and drops the lantern that was illuminating their path. He falls and dislocates his leg, which immediately leaves a terrible blue bruise. Calix notices that they are without a lantern as soon as he looks at its broken glass and the fire goes out. A terrible fear immediately appears in his eyes. He immediately begins to blame Griffith for this. In his opinion, he distracted him with his chatter, and because of this, they lost the lantern. Griffith mockingly responds to all claims that the victim's impressions are impressive, and Calix responds by shouting that he is a complete idiot and cretin. The time traveler starts watching from the bushes as two guys start fighting because of their conflict. Calix starts a fight even with a swollen and aching leg. Griffith just yells at him that this is terribly stupid. He says that all this has done is waste their time. Calix is left alone. The guy calls him a coward, shouting after him to go away. The traveler remembers this moment in the original work with horror and learns how they fought, which is why Calix was left alone. In the future, Griffith said that they had quarreled over a trifle, but still would not have left him, and Calix replied that they were both immature children then. Now the plot has changed and they have moved away from each other. Calix groans in pain from his leg when he is left alone with himself. He tells himself that he is left out in the cold. The guy decides to do nothing and stay where he is now. Suddenly, Calix begins to hear something. There is hope in his voice, and the smile on his face gives it all away as he asks why Griffith decided to go back, asking if he was afraid to go alone. But a pale hand with the same white sleeve on it emerges from the bushes. This scares the boy, who is left alone without any light. He doesn't scream, but goes into silent shock. The hand says it's not Griffith. This leads the guy to the point of speechlessness and stuttering due to nerves and enormous stress in a short period of time. But then the girl's clothes suddenly get caught on a tree at the most inopportune moment. Rio was pleased that he was able to free himself, but there was someone's silhouette behind him. He notices this approaching shadow and does not have time to understand everything. The Crown Prince was not prepared for Calix to fly at him, screaming for the demon to go away. The guy's foot lands on his back with a loud crunch. He begins to writhe in pain from his leg, which is already injured. Rio begins to howl from the pain, which immediately spreads throughout his entire body. Calix asks if this is the same Crown Prince who plays the leader, while his whole body aches in pain and starts to cramp. The Crown Prince only answers him that at least they don't consider him a demon. Even with a bruise, the guy continues to be cheeky and says that Rio turned out to be much weaker than he even thought. Rio tells him that now is not the time for him to say that and suggests that they quickly go down the mountain right now because they have to do it. Calix simply remains silent and does not answer him. The boy lies on his back and puts his hands behind his head while the Crown Prince tries to call him. He keeps arguing and saying how he can go down the mountain with his leg in such a condition. In his opinion, they have no other choice but to wait here until the morning. The traveler begins to think about how ignorant and careless Calix is, because he doesn't even know who made her go all this way and even get a serious wound. Tonight on this mountain, he will lose one of his arms in an attack by wild animals. The time traveler thinks about telling the truth, although no one will ever believe it. She says that a wild beast will appear on the mountain that night, but Calix doesn't believe it and calls her words wild nonsense. Everything turned out just as the newcomer thought, although she still didn't expect anything. Rio asks Calix if he trusts his uncle. He immediately pounces on the Crown Prince and calls him a little brat, asking who sent him, demanding an answer immediately. The Crown Prince asks who could have sent him. The traveler sincerely does not understand why he behaves this way. Rio introduces himself as the Crown Prince of Auraria, saying that he was sent by the Emperor of Auraria. At that moment, Calix's violence and aggression disappear for a moment, and he begins to think about something of his own. They continue to argue, and the Crown Prince demands to let him go, while Calix exhales heavily. The guy asks how he knows about his uncle, and Rio replies that he has pretty good intuition, deciding to say just that for now. The Empire of Asgard is a land of deserts and sorcery, ravaged by relentless tyranny. The people forced everyone, both adults and children, to engage in exhausting labor, leaving them to suffer. All the horrors in the Empire were because of Asgard, and Calix was a thorn in his side because he could lay claim to the throne, which the Emperor did not need. Rio says that Emperor Asgard is trying to take his life. Calix asks if he means to say that his uncle sent wild beasts to the mountain to kill him, to which the Crown Prince replies in the affirmative. The guy is silent, although it is hard for him to believe it. With a stern look, he incinerates him. He says that he will simply die then, which causes real horror. Calix says that he is even ready to die. If that is what his uncle wants, then he will die. This shocks the newcomer. The guy chases the Crown Prince away, telling him to get lost, since the animals will soon come here, as he himself told him. He shouts at him to go away, calling him an idiot, saying that it doesn't concern him in any way. The time traveler begins to think how she can simply leave him, knowing that he will suffer. Besides, at the moment she contacted him, there is no guarantee that everything will develop the same way as in the original story. If this happens, it might not just be one hand, and Calix might actually die. This makes it difficult for the traveler to breathe, and a lump appears in her throat. She feels incredibly sad and hurt for Calix because he acts like he's tough when deep down he's unbearably scared. Calix yells at him for the umpteenth time to leave him alone before he kills him right there. Rio replies that he was going to leave even if he hadn't asked him to. He begins to shake violently from worries and anxiety that grows with each passing moment. The Crown Prince, standing over him, replies that he still won't go alone. He asks Calix to be patient for a little while. He only asks first what he has in mind, and then asks again what Rio just said. The time traveler knocks out Calyx and starts carrying him in her arms. If he hadn't lost consciousness, she would have hit him a couple more times. But while she was carrying it, many things turned out to be not as she thought. The guy turned out to be much heavier than she imagined. The problem was that she had no idea where to go. The only thing the girl can rely on is the moonlight, but even following the path, she does not feel that she is going anywhere. She begins to think that magic or witchcraft has turned their path into a labyrinth, but now the traveler should have found her way from here. But somewhere nearby, rustling sounds are heard from the bushes. These sounds are getting closer and louder. Rio is afraid that wolves will appear in front of them now. But then they ask him what he is doing here, and the Crown Prince himself seems to breathe a sigh of relief. He is greatly surprised by the appearance of Griffith in front of him. This immediately made the newcomer happy because she was sure that the guy had left without Calyx. Rio introduces himself as the Crown Prince of Auraria, and he replies that he has seen his face before and asks what he is doing here. The Crown Prince replies that he does not have time to explain this now because the situation is very complicated. He will never believe his words, but this mountain is dangerous, and monsters will appear soon, to which Griffith says that priests walk on this mountain. Rio immediately asks him if he can say that, and after he encounters the wolf, in any case, he must go with him and get off this mountain. Griffith replies that these paths are somehow tangled, like the most terrible and complex labyrinth, which the Crown Prince himself already knows, but he is sure that the exit is still somewhere. He says he has already found the way. The traveler immediately becomes very happy, asking again whether he really already knows the way. She notices one thing that surprises her. Griffith's lantern contained fireflies. They are not very bright, but he obviously saved them to use instead of candles. The time traveler is becoming more and more surprised with each passing minute. Griffith, even if he had not yet fully awakened, he had innate holy power since childhood and could see clearly even in complete darkness, but he still abandoned Calyx in the original. He asks what happened to Calyx, and Rio replies that it looks like he fainted from fear. Griffith starts laughing and calls him a weakling who was acting arrogant and said he knew it would happen. Rio thinks about it at this moment when he realizes that the plot is already changing a lot. Even if he speaks rudely, it must be because he was worried about him, since they also crossed paths in the original story. But Griffith arrived too late, when Calyx was already bleeding to death without an arm. The traveler starts to chuckle and a smile appears on her face. Griffith asks the Crown Prince to stop laughing so much. Rio tells him that he seems to have misunderstood him. The Crown Prince asks Calyx if he is really a good man. This question takes him by surprise, but the traveler tells him to start leading them back along the road to the hut because they need to get out of here quickly. Griffith tells them to just follow the light. But then Rio calls out to him because he notices something. A huge wolf, compared to their childish height, seemed to fly past him. Griffith immediately jumps back to somehow protect himself. A large wound remains on the victim's stomach. Her legs begin to wobble, barely keeping her balance, with the knocked-out Calyx on her back as blood begins to flow from her wound. The Crown Prince is trying his best to hold on despite the gravity of his situation. Rio's gaze becomes very frightened and cold sweat runs down his face. Griffith takes a long stick, for at least some protection from the wolves. One of the flock of animals begins to howl loudly at the moon. The guy can't believe that the wolves actually appeared so suddenly and abruptly. Rio calls out to the frightened Griffith, who immediately stands next to him. He asks him to blow the whistle that hangs on his chain. The Crown Prince, breathing heavily, asks him to act faster. Griffith begins to think about Rio in a new way. He is surprised that he is not afraid of everything that is happening here. The time traveler understands that their situation is getting worse and worse with every passing minute. She is too scared to take even the smallest step. Even if they give a signal, the priests will not come immediately. But for now, they need to act to save themselves, and Griffith blows his whistle as loud as he can so that it is as loud as possible, because that way they will definitely be heard and come to their aid. At this point, the magician hiding in the tree begins to tense up. After all, it's enough to simply make them think that priests might come here. If you're lucky, they'll panic and retreat along with the wolves, and the newcomer will be able to finish them off. But then Griffith notices something. He protects the wounded Rio, who is carrying Calyx on his back, from a huge beast wolf. The guy hits him with a sharp stick. The wolf does not retreat and approaches them. The beast bites his forearm so deeply that blood immediately flies in all directions. Rio screams at the top of his lungs in utter shock and fear as his eyes immediately become wet with despair. But then a strong purple glow appears, which is clearly created by magical powers. A circle appears around Griffith with a rune in the center. The traveler understands that this is a holy power that the guy should not have awakened for a long time. But such a desperate moment hastened his awakening, and so that the wolf already lies in blood. Griffith says he's okay and looks at his bloody hand. Immediately his eyes turn purple and he looks at Calyx, who has begun to wake up. Calyx asks why it suddenly became so light and so noisy. He wakes up completely and opens his eyes, stopping yawning. In front of him is Griffith, who has a huge, severe wound that just won't stop bleeding. And next to them, fierce wolves approach. Rio asks Calyx to calm down and wait. He immediately brazenly demands to let him go and pushes him behind his back. The Crown Prince calls him at the top of his voice, starting to worry about him even more, because now their threats to life have increased many times over. Calyx, with all his stubbornness, gets to his feet, although he is clearly leaning from side to side, although no one would know about his real condition from his lips. The guy with a serious face stops showing his fear. He lies down on the ground and a wolf with the same bloody paws and mouth rushes at him. This frightens the newcomer to the point of utter horror, so much so that her eyes begin to dart and twitch. Calyx and Rio begin to call out to Calyx, who they see as surrendering to certain death. In the original story, he lost one to a wolf attack, but even with his remaining hand, he wielded a huge sword. The boy became a warrior, playing the most important role in the team to conquer the dragon, but in exchange for this, he had to pay an irreversible price. The time traveler starts to cry, and tears one by one start to flow down her cheeks. She just wanted to protect the hand that he was supposed to lose today. She starts to blame herself and think that she should have planned more carefully before acting, and that all this happened because of her, only making the situation worse. But suddenly she notices something in front of her. Calyx strikes the wolf with all his might, smashing its mouth with his fists. But then it turns out that he not only beat him with his fists, but also cut the wolf with a dagger. The time traveler cannot believe it, although she sees everything with her own eyes. Calyx screams that it really is a wolf, and Rio should have told him that he would be real while he was already lying dead in front of him. Rio calls him an idiot when he comes to his senses after all this excitement, and replies that he said that the wolf was real. They both start arguing over how one didn't trust the other when they should have, but at that point Griffith tells them that now is not the time for such arguments. Bloodthirsty beasts are still coming towards them, and it seems there is no end to them. The magician in the tree continues to use magic tirelessly. The night had not even begun to pass, and the sky was dark. But suddenly the magician is unable to continue using the spell, and the rune around his hand goes out. Griffith immediately looks closely at what is happening around them. Immediately the wolves scatter into the air and disappear. Even the already dead wolf near Calyx begins to crumble. Griffith shouts, asking if all those bloodthirsty and real wolves have turned into pitiful sand under their feet. He tramples on the sand where the terrifying beast had just been and does not understand how they could have disappeared so easily. Rio explains to him that they simply destroyed any evidence, thinking that he couldn't be killed. Griffith says the wolves seem to be under control. He suggests that the scroll was meant to make them retreat, which is what happened. His gaze falls on the scroll hanging on a chain around Rio's neck. Calyx says that he was the one being hunted, which surprises the worried newcomer with his decision to confess so quickly. The guy tells them that this is magic that is only used in the Asgard Empire. All magic is built on the control of sand and the creation of everything from it. He clutches the sand in his hands, which obeys him with ease because it is from the Asgard Empire. Calyx covers his face with a threatening fist and begins to think out loud that this is his uncle. Tears begin to stream down his cheeks. It hurts him greatly that the words about his own uncle trying to kill him turned out to be true, bitter and terrifying to the depths of his soul. Rio tries to start a conversation with him to help him somehow, but can only say his name. Their conversation doesn't go well. The time traveler falls silent, thinking that at least he didn't lose his arm and remained alive. She invites him to climb on her back, since it is not yet safe, and they will go down the mountain together. Here, Calyx is not even embarrassed to show her tears and emotions. Griffith is indignant and says that he will carry him on his back himself, to which Rio refuses, and says that his arm is very badly injured, and they can make each other worse from this. The Crown Prince orders them to climb onto his back, as he no longer has the strength to knock him out a second time. Calyx continues to whine. All this irritates him very much, and the guy shouts about the hopelessness of the situation, but he is constantly ordered to climb on their back because he will not be able to walk on his own. Rio drags Calix on his back and says that they should be heading down the mountain already, but he asks why his right ankle hurts so much, to which the Crown Prince replies that he accidentally stepped on it when he knocked him out. Calix immediately calls him a stupid idiot, and Rio asks him to stop because he asked for forgiveness. A moment ago, they were almost dying, and now, under the first rays of the sun, they walk together as if nothing had happened. Griffith notes that things have become much easier for them now, and there are much fewer disagreements as a result. The sun had already begun to shine much brighter and warmer, a beautiful dawn had come and illuminated the entire road. The priests had already begun to gather with each other. They start discussing whether they should have started looking for them already. According to the princes, Rio also went to the mountain alone. Oscar is immediately frightened by the general panic over the disappearance of his captain, but then he notices people among the trees in the distance. Oscar shouts with joy and surprise that he sees the captain, and Romeo immediately asks him where he noticed him. Rio arrives with Calix on his back and breathing extremely heavily. In his thoughts, there is only joy from the long-awaited completion of their entire route. Immediately my legs give way. Everything in front of my eyes instantly blurs, and all that can be heard is a joyful cry calling for the captain. The traveler begins to hear someone crying bitterly and opens her eyes, while a blurry portrait of red eyes and ash-colored hair appears in front of her. Oscar immediately asks if the captain is okay, while he can't stop crying, which has led to the fact that not only the color of his irises has turned red, but also his cheeks. She asks why the boy is crying. Romeo, whom the girl notices only now, immediately replies that it was because the captain was in pain, and he was more worried about him than anyone else. They say they are already at the temple and that Rio should be fine and completely safe now. Romeo says that he will now call the priest and asks Oscar to look after the victim. Oscar says that the Crown Prince immediately fainted, and Rio immediately asks what happened to the others. The guy replies that they are fine and are now meeting with the high priest after treatment. Immediately, the priestess comes into the room and is glad that Crown Prince Rio has woken up, asking if he is experiencing any discomfort or pain in his body. The traveler replies that everything is fine, and the priestess begins to seem kind. Here, she immediately understands the seriousness of the fact that she does not feel any pain anywhere. Her stomach wound has completely healed, and her clothes are also completely intact. The traveler begins to shake with terrible fear. She begins to worry because if her true gender is discovered, the Emperor will kill her. Oscar immediately asks the captain if everything is okay. The priest whispers in her ear that everything is fine. It was she who changed her clothes. The woman says that the others don't know anything and everything is fine. And she herself won't tell anyone anything either. At this point, the newcomer only became more nervous. The priestess leaves, leaving her with her thoughts. She doesn't understand what is the best thing for her to do now. Calix and Griffith arrive, saying that Rio looks quite normal. She immediately feels better knowing that the two of them are okay. It seems that the priests were able to heal their hands, so now they don't even remember those wounds so carefree. She is very glad that everything is okay. Now they were all gathered together, the four of them. Griffith says that Rio must also meet with the high priest. They intend to file a complaint regarding this incident. Everyone is surprised that he didn't think about doing something because he is also a royal person. Doubt appears in the head of the traveler. There was a very major incident that was incredibly dangerous for all the children. The temple is obliged to notify the other kingdoms and conduct a thorough investigation. In the original, Calix lost his arm, and the news reached the ears of the children of every kingdom. The news spread like wildfire. The situation got out of control. Asgard tried to hush it up. The time traveler remembers how Uncle Calix gave a speech about what happened in the temple, reminding about the purpose of the children's stay there, and other kingdoms could no longer interfere with this. Eventually, the temple apologized to each kingdom and assured them that something like this would never happen again. And after that, the temple took extreme measures to ensure the safety of the children. The time traveler wonders how Calix felt in the same situation after losing his arm in the original story. In the original, the guy also knew that his uncle was trying to kill him, but he couldn't tell anyone about it and couldn't get any help. It was not a surprise to her because his uncle, who was of his blood, wanted to kill him. In this situation, it was difficult to trust at least someone. Other children then began to avoid him, as his life was in terrible danger, and that was how his childhood passed in the original. The time traveler asks them if others know about what happened in the mountains, and Griffith replies that it is unlikely that others are even slightly aware of it. Rio suggests not to tell anyone because he wants them to forget what happened to them. Griffith asks if he's gone crazy. Calix is shocked by this proposal, while Romeo screams at their captain to ask if he is in his right mind. The time traveler looks at him and understands that he is holding back and not letting it get out. But Calix must have suffered greatly after this incident. In the original story, despite such emotional trauma, he voluntarily gave up power and became the king of mercenaries. But he's still just a kid, so Rio asks them for one thing. He asks them to keep this incident a secret. Griffith immediately asks for reasons why they should do this. The newcomer doesn't immediately know what to tell them. She says that if her father finds out, they will all be in huge trouble. His father is overprotective of the child, to the point that he kisses him every time and cannot fall asleep without his son's embrace. The time traveler herself feels disgusted to say all this, while the others are simply no less horrified except for the laughing Calix, and begin to worry. She promises to fulfill everyone's wish. Calix says he didn't mean to make a big deal out of it. Griffith is adamant that he will do whatever his friend thinks is right. Romeo shouts with caustic indignation that the captain hit his head and asks him to think about it again. He begins to list. Calix injured his arm and leg, Griffith almost lost his arm, and the captain himself seemed to have lost his brain after the wound and the encounter with the wolves. The captain replies that Roseberry should shut up. Romeo is very offended by him. He leaves and shouts after them that their captain is an idiot. The traveler thinks about how much stress this little thing causes. Oscar asks the captain to calm down, because they all know what kind of character Romeo has, and he himself must behave like an adult. Rio replies that this is true because a more mature person should behave like this. They talk about Romeo while Calix and Griffith look on. They ask him why Oscar and Romeo call him captain, and whether he wants to play the leader like that. Rio explains to them that they are doing this of their own free will, and not for the sake of some game. The boys exchange silent glances. Calix smirks and asks if that means anything. Griffith continues and asks again that if they want to call him captain, they can do that too. Rio asks with a little excitement if they are really going to. They both say with smiles that from now on they are under his command and call him their captain. Several days have passed since then, and since the people involved in the incident have asked the temple to remain silent, they must have an idea of what is going on. The high priests came to apologize to them, promising that such a thing would never happen again. But the time traveler knows that nothing will come of their investigation, because this incident was specially arranged after the high priests came to an agreement with the Emperor of Asgard. They all go to bed, and Romeo says that they better not go over to his side. Oscar says that the blonde guy is the one who always rolls over on his side, and his bad sleeping habits make it hard for everyone to fall asleep. Griffith says he should have bought another bed, separate from all the others. Calix immediately calls everyone too noisy, and they should just go to bed. The traveler enters her spacious room, which now has 4 more beds, placed next to each other. She doesn't understand why they are all in her room with their beds at once. Romeo immediately joyfully invites the captain to sleep with them. The captain immediately leaves the room and slams the door. The traveler doesn't understand how she will have to sleep with them in the same room. It is hard for her to realize that she will now have to live together with 4 future heroes. She doesn't understand how it all happened. Everything should be fine, but it will only be for the 3 years she needs to spend here. And if everything goes according to this scenario, the traveler will never see them again anyway, because soon after she returns to Auraria, the real Rio Auraria will die. The girls notice the guy who is rumored to be the captain, the one the other 4 most popular guys call him. Everyone admires him incredibly. The girls, without hiding it at all, drool over him. One of them decided to wake up early while he was alone in order to get closer. Rio is quite surprised by this because of all the unexpectedness. The girl immediately addresses him as the Crown Prince of Auraria. The traveler confirms that everything is really like this, to maintain the image. The girl immediately says that she is from the Nicaean Empire and her father is Count Cerdes. The Crown Prince thinks about something of his own for a moment, but then he smiles warmly at her and asks what she needs from him. She immediately becomes embarrassed and worried. The girl immediately admits that she just wants to be closer to him because he usually only communicates with guys. Ryo immediately asks if she is talking about those guys, to which she hears a positive answer. Everyone has already seen and heard how they call him their captain. She admits that this impresses her. The traveler herself involuntarily becomes embarrassed by such words and smiles awkwardly. The Crown Prince says that it is not that important. It is just something that comes natural to him. But she is really impressed by this, which she says again, and the newcomer doesn't know what to do in this situation, but decides to put on a confident look and gracefully fix her hair to impress. Even with a beautiful girl like her goal of remaining quiet was completely destroyed. She fully understood the reason for this and her popularity. It's all because of these leeches princes. All 4 princes always came for her. Wherever she went, they were all by her side. The time traveler went into her thoughts and sadness because now they do not allow her to find even a minute of peace. Today she even woke up early to get rid of them. And since all the princes were under her control, interest in her person has grown many times over. The children of Auraria were chosen by the emperor himself. They have never seen Ryo, so no one can know that she is a fake, but she and the crown prince have completely different personalities. The real Ryo is a reckless and hopeless case, but she won't have to worry about being compared to him later. 3 years later, she will return to Auraria, soon after which the Emperor and Crown Prince Ryo will die. They will be killed during the rebellion. But that girl calls her sharply. Ryo asks her to continue talking about what she started. She immediately became embarrassed. The Crown Prince immediately noticed her shyness and said that if she had any questions, she should not hesitate to ask them. The girl asks the Crown Prince about Griffith because she wants to know what he said about her, if he said a word at all. Ryo is very surprised. It seemed to him that she was interested in him, but not that the stranger was interested in someone else. She clarifies that Griffith is her fiancé, but lately he seems busy and distant. Ryo apologizes, but can't say anything because he didn't go into the matter with him. He starts a conversation about his similar dislike of eating with his subordinates. It's just not his thing, and at that moment, a joyful cry flies through the entire dining room, calling for the captain. 4 silhouettes appear in the doorway, with Calyx in front of them. The dark-skinned boy calls him a fool for going to the dining room alone and not waiting for any of them. The time traveler did not expect her subordinates to appear so early and mentally calls them damned clingy leeches. Griffith looks distant, but suddenly his gaze falls on his daughter-in-law, but the emotions on his face do not change much. The daughter-in-law herself becomes stunned by the unexpectedness of meeting him, and her embarrassment reaches its peak. She quickly runs away, agreeing to talk to the Crown Prince next time. She is noticed by Romeo, who did not hear their conversation and understood everything in his own way. Oscar asks the captain who was just with him. Romeo immediately wants to know if she is Ryo's girlfriend. Calyx mockingly repeats the word girl, making a stupid face. He doesn't understand how that girl can be a match for a guy like their captain, and the newcomer realizes what a big misunderstanding has occurred. Oscar objects and shouts that Calyx is not very close with girls, so he doesn't know, but their captain is very cool, and these touch Ryo to the depths of his soul. Romeo starts making jokes about Calyx's reputation as a dumb guy, when their captain, on the contrary, is very popular with the girls. The Crown Prince only lets out a heavy sigh. Oscar asks if that girl is really his mate. This question causes an awkward silence between them and surprises Ryo. He replies that this is not the case at all because otherwise they will have big problems. That girl just said that she is Prince Griffith's fiancé. Calyx immediately becomes shocked and asks again if his friend really has a fiancé. Griffith asks if there is anyone here without a bride, and Calyx replies that he does not have one. Romeo immediately screams and calls it all a lie, and Oscar admits that he doesn't have a bride either. The time traveler understands that the emperors did not give daughters-in-law to the princes simply because they hated them. But suddenly Romeo, as the one most interested in this, asks if their captain has a lady love. Ryo is embarrassed and doesn't know what to tell them all. Confident in his guesses, the blonde says that he is 100% sure of this. The Crown Prince immediately becomes even more embarrassed, and his excitement turns into growing panic. Calyx begins to argue that the captain has no one, but Romeo continues to claim the opposite. The traveler doesn't understand what she needs to say because in the original story, nothing was said about Ryo's daughter-in-law. It was logical, since Crown Prince Auraria was only a minor character, but if the newcomer made a mistake now, it would cause problems in the future. She begins to remember everything and think about her next steps. The real Ryo was deeply loved by the Emperor, so having a bride shouldn't raise any questions. But since she was sent here in his place, things might not be so simple. She can't know anything for sure. She'll have to evade with the information she has. The Crown Prince reminds them of his poor health, most likely. They didn't tell him about his bride so as not to worry him. He heard his father talk about something like that, so it could be true, or it could not. Everyone starts to think that this makes sense. Calix reminds him with disbelief that the captain dragged him down the mountain. Even though he looks fragile, he has strength in him. Ryo immediately begins to justify himself by saying that the situation was so tense that time, and that's why he didn't realize how hard it was for him to carry. If it weren't for the priests, his muscles would have become minced meat. Calix is embarrassed by the words of the captain, who found inhuman strength in himself from a huge desire to save him. An awkward silence ensues between them, and the pride of both of them prevents them from saying a single word to each other. Romeo asks if he could have been in the same danger. Would the captain have been able to save him? The captain hesitates to answer and asks him again, and this immediately makes the blonde man throw a tantrum and remind him that he was the first to get close to him. Ryo replies that of course he would have done the same. Oscar immediately asks if this means that he would have saved him too. The captain replies that if it were him, he would carry him on himself every time. In his mind, it shouldn't be difficult, because Oscar is smaller than him. The Crown Prince winks at him. Oscar is very happy, and his cheeks are red with pleasant embarrassment. His facial expressions are very touching to the newcomer, which is why she strokes his head to her. He looks like the most beautiful fairy. The girl can't believe her eyes and doesn't understand how one can be so cute, even being older. She thinks and asks herself if she had a younger brother, would it feel the same? They have different eye colors but the same hair. The captain touches a strand of Oscar's hair and says he's been thinking about one thing. They have very similar hair. People might think they are brothers. Oscar immediately asks him again, not believing his ears, and the Crown Prince tells him that he can consider him an older brother and rely on him in everything. Calix doesn't understand them. He calls it ridiculous. Discussing such things that could lead to a massacre between two nations is stupid. Romeo supports him and adds that sometimes he wants to shut the captain's mouth. Ryo begins to get irritated by such expressions, while Oscar looks too happy to think about anything other than the Crown Prince's words. But the newcomer notices something. One of her subordinates became completely silent. Griffith hardly said a word. The traveler begins to think. He looks like a lost child, follows her along with the others, but is always cold and distant, which makes her nervous. She decides not to torment or keep this tension in her thoughts. Ryo starts a conversation with Griffith. The captain says simply so that he knows, and for his sake, he would do the same. Griffith is also confused and very surprised by this. The Crown Prince jokes that he wouldn't whine like Calix from being carried, and the guy in question asks who else is whining here. Griffith says he didn't even ask. Ryo answers without even thinking and invites everyone to start eating. Romeo asks if the captain had eaten before they all came here. The Crown Prince replies that he can eat much more. Everyone is already asleep. Oscar is having a seizure. A shudder runs through his body. He begins to sob bitterly and covers his face with his hands. But he remembers the captain's words that he is fine, safe, and can rely on him. The boy curls up into a ball and mentally asks the captain to help him. Romeo invites everyone to take a walk outside, saying that one cannot sit within four walls all the time. Calix asks if they are going to the garden, to which the blonde replies no. He invites everyone to play outside the temple grounds. They say there is a shopping district in the neutral zone. Griffith clarifies that the quarter is actually far from the temple, and because of its location in the neutral zone, trade there is flourishing and, in general, lively. Ryo asks if the priests will let them out. Romeo makes a gesture with his hand for the captain to keep quiet. He clarifies that the three of them were attacked by wolves in the mountains. Such a serious incident would create a gap between the empires and the Kreutz Temple. Griffith says that since they decided to turn a blind eye to this, they now have a weak spot in the temple. Romeo happily says that it is time to restore order and force the priests to react. After all, they will assign them escorts anyway. The traveler really wanted to visit the outside of the temple because she had only been in the far corner of the castle and in the temple. If she missed this chance, then another one might not present itself. Rio agrees to go together, and Romeo becomes even more joyful. Oscar says he wants to stay. The initiator of the whole walk immediately asks him about the reasons, whether he wants to walk with them specifically or whether it's something else. The guy replies that he just wants to sleep and they can go without him. He leaves the room. The traveler is very surprised and upset by this. Suddenly she remembers his words. He is afraid to be in crowded places. It is not only because of the trauma he received from his father, but he is also afraid around others. The girl thinks about how she can help Oscar, and suddenly an idea comes to her. Romeo immediately asks what's wrong with him, because it's not every day that you get a chance to have fun outside. But he is very surprised that the captain suggests that everyone go for a walk. Rio asks why the guy was so surprised, since they all wanted to go for a walk. Romeo does not dare to leave Oscar alone and go away without him. The time traveler recalls that at first it was she who irritated Oscar. Still, Romeo is not as bad as he may seem. A smile appears on the girl's face. The carriage arrives at the shopping district. Many people in the brightest outfits are having conversations and selling goods in shops. The street outside the temple greatly amazed the newcomer, but not her subordinate princes. Romeo says that this shopping mall still doesn't compare to the Roseberry Empire's shopping district. Calix says there's nothing to see here, just a hassle, but Griffith is happy with the cleanliness of the street. The traveler curses them in her thoughts, calling them vile nobles. A knight suddenly addresses the princes and reminds them not to stray too far from the group because too many people are gathering there. Rio promises that they will be as careful as possible and thanks them for their concern. As Romeo had expected, the priests let them go and allowed them to walk only in the area near the temple, but they assigned them 5 knights to accompany them. The time traveler wonders whether they should look for something special. But suddenly an idea comes to her. Romeo asks if the captain noticed anything interesting. The guy asks if Rio is not only a mama's boy, but also sleeps with a doll. The shop owner welcomes the young children, but he is frightened by the appearance of several knights next to them. The thought occurs to him that these children could be from royal families. Rio notices what he was looking for. The toy rabbit seems to be looking back at him. The crown prince takes the toy in his hand and his cheeks turn red. Romeo doesn't understand his admiration and asks if he really loves her and if he's going to buy it, since they're not girls. The captain asks if girls can love dolls. Romeo replies that of course not, and Rio asks if Calix has money. The guy replies that he didn't even take anything and he doesn't even have any money with him. Romeo says that he doesn't have anything either because they shouldn't be carrying something like that around with them. The captain immediately asks Griffith if he has anything. He is smart and probably took a little. Griffith replies that he has just that, and Rio calls him his most trusted subordinate, asks him to borrow it, and promises to return everything. The guy allows her not to repay the debt and buy another doll, because the captain is very happy, which makes the girl even more delighted. Griffith asks to choose faster. The captain agrees, pleased with his kindness. In the original story, there are 2 episodes associated with the dolls. One is related to Oscar. He is secretly in love with the protagonist, Juliana. When he found out that she was going to marry the original main male character, he immediately began to look for her. He confessed his love to her too late, but Juliana, although she was a kind person, politely refused him. The girl gave him one of the dolls that her father and brothers constantly gave her. The girl has long since become an adult, so it is strange to receive a doll as a gift, but she likes it. It seems to her that she will protect her all her life, and she gives it to Oscar. At that time, Juliana was overwhelmed with toys that her father and brothers had given her. She didn't know what to do with them, and she gave them to everyone she met. But the doll became special for Oscar. She became for him the one who did not see in him the red-eyed monster who killed his father and seized the throne by force, was not afraid and gave him a doll. Oscar in the original story was able to get rid of the nightmare that had haunted him all his life. While it may not have the same effect as the gift from the original story's protagonist, it might at least help him calm down, at least psychologically. Rio chooses 2 rabbits, and Griffith asks if he is going to give one of them to Oscar. Calix asks if he can buy one of the dolls for himself, to which Griffith refuses. Romeo also asks to buy a doll, at least for him, but receives the same refusal. Romeo disapprovingly calls him terribly rude. Griffith lets out a heavy sigh of irritation. He agrees that the two of them should choose just one each, to which Romeo immediately, happily ran to look for the biggest one. This moment is very memorable for the traveler and resonates in her heart. The doll is now hers, a cute plush bunny who smiles at her. The girl hugs her doll, and the doll she wants to give to Oscar. Not understanding why this makes her so happy, she wants to help him, but there is no lie in her feelings. She begins to think about the reason why she chose the dolls, but suddenly decides that it might be because Raylia wanted it. But the time traveler is not going to act like in the original story, but one cannot be sure that greed will not appear, even if only a little. Although if the toy is with her, then she will definitely be fine. The second episode involving dolls, when Raylia steals the protagonist's doll, this will never happen now. Juliana is the main character of the novel, a sweet girl loved by everyone. She grew up in extremely disadvantaged circumstances. Her father was a cruel man and abused Juliana, and Juliana's miserable days continued until one meeting with someone. This man beat her father to the point that his fists were bloody. It turned out to be the one everyone thought was dead. The former emperor of Auraria, Perseus Aurarius, he became a victim of the machinations of his younger brother. Perseus lost his wife, baby, and his throne, after which he ran away with the twin princes and hid for a long time. And so Juliana's mother became his wife, and together they began to make plans to return to the throne. In a sense, it was an arranged marriage, and in the end, Juliana became the emperor's daughter. Perseus gathered old allies and those who were dissatisfied with the rule of Ridios and killed his brother. 10 years after losing the throne, the real emperor regained his empire. By this point, the real Crown Prince Rio had already disappeared from history, having already met his tragic end, poisoned by his vassals who held a grudge against Ridios. On the other hand, Juliana enjoyed the fairy tale life of the only princess and wanted to get at least a little closer to Perseus. The girl wanted to make up for the peaceful time she was unable to spend with her biological father. Juliana wanted to hold hands with her father, just like any other child. He shouted at his daughter not to touch him, but then a terrible fear appeared on Perseus's face from the realization of what he had done. The man accidentally hit her hand, and this caused poor Juliana great mental trauma, as well as Perseus himself. Juliana asked her mother if her father hated her, and her mother answered that of course not. He did not hate her. The little girl wants to start talking about the opposite, but her mother asks to look at her. Perseus brings a huge teddy bear. He hands it to his daughter and asks for forgiveness for scaring her, because he is simply not used to being touched. The man asks if she will forgive him. Juliana reaches out to the bear's paw. The girl agrees to forgive him, which pleases the worried man. She is glad that her father does not hate her. This was noticed by two twin brothers. In this episode, Perseus and her two brothers fell in love with Juliana, after which they began to give her dolls as gifts. Why is Raylia not in this part of the story? Because she is not the main character and lived in a tower where even sunlight did not reach. After assuring life in the temple as the fake Rio, Raylia was left with only this tower, nothing more than life in this tower. Ridios and Rio died, and Perseus was responsible for her fate. The vassals argued daily about how to get rid of her, calling Perseus a usurper who had seized the throne and was asking him to take care of his child. They actively negotiated about the future of Raylia, feared a possible uprising, and proposed candidates for her political marriage. Perseus was tired of this dismal meeting. In the end, he said that he didn't even want to hear Raylia's name and postponed the decision indefinitely, allowing her to continue living in the tower. He didn't even care that his sister's daughter was starving. It didn't cross the line. After all, Raylia's mother, Princess Iris, was a villain who tortured Perseus's dead wife, Elizabeth, and he would never help Raylia, whom he hated to death. Juliana is a bright and sweet girl who had everything. And Raylia, the skinny, natural child who never had anything. Raylia was so hungry that she didn't even have the strength to become an envious villain who would mock Juliana. All she could do was go into the forest behind the castle to look for fruit and not die of hunger. A minor character with no interesting traits. That day would have been no different from any other if she hadn't found a blanket and a picnic basket and met Juliana. She could have simply remained an insignificant supporting character, but Raylia immediately ran to the basket containing the picnic food. The girl looks at her with excitement. Her hand reaches for the cookies and immediately grabs one of them. Relia ate cookies one after another, but something makes her stop immediately. An unfamiliar girl was sleeping on the blankets. It turned out to be Juliana. At first, Relia only wrinkled her face with disdain, but then her eyes instantly sparkled with admiration. In the hands of the sleeping Juliana lay a teddy bear. Relia herself did not understand how greed, attracted by the sweet aroma, began to play within her. She reaches out her hand to someone else's doll. The girl, completely overcome with envy, snatches the teddy bear. Despite her envy, she wanted to hug the doll to feel at least a little bit of love. Even this made her very happy. Relia hugs the doll with both hands. She quickly gets ready to leave, but suddenly she is noticed and ordered to stop, and that is when all the problems began. The twin brothers ask how she dares to steal from the princess. The thief should be ashamed. They recognize her. The brothers realize that in front of them is the daughter of their aunt, who tortured their mother. Juliana notices that her doll is not next to her, and her brothers ask if their mother's torture wasn't enough. Now her daughter is stealing Juliana's things. They shout at her. How dare she steal in the imperial palace? Juliana asks them to stop and stop talking like that. She greets her and introduces herself, saying that this doll is very dear to her. The girl would be very grateful if Relia returned her and asks to return her doll. Relia looks at the teddy bear with fear. She holds it out into Juliana's hands. Juliana immediately becomes happy and thanks her. The twin brothers say that there is no need to thank the thief and order to ask the thief for forgiveness. Cedric and Damien order her to kneel down and apologize to Juliana, but the young girl herself asks them to stop because the doll was returned to her. Cedric says that he is well aware of her kindness, but as the princess of the empire, she needs to set an example. They want to convey to her that this cannot be ignored. At this point, the twin brothers turn their attention to Relia again. They order her to bow her head. Damien says the number 100 times. She is ordered to bow and ask for forgiveness 100 more times. The girl begins to ask for forgiveness with great sorrow. It just goes on and on. The emperor arrives in the evening. Juliana notices this and immediately calls him. He picks her up and says that it's already dinner time and they need to return to the castle. The twin brothers immediately call this a scam because Juliana said that they would be able to carry it. Relia looks at all this with bitter despair and envy. The emperor notices her but does not say a word to her. He simply turns around and starts walking with his daughter into the castle. Juliana, who was kind even to thieves, and her brothers, who loved her to the point of madness, even too much, made Relia even more envious. The emperor was not interested in anyone except Juliana, their behavior, as well as Relia's position, which looked like just a prop, contrasted with the original Relia, who had never experienced love. Evening is coming. Rio tells Oscar that they are all back now. Oscar greets him and asks the captain if he liked the area, but in front of his face appears a toy rabbit with a red bow, the color of his eyes. The toy rabbit smiles at him. Oscar holds it in his hands, but he cannot fully understand and believe what is happening now. Rio says he came to give a gift, thought he would like it, says that this doll can take away other people's pain and longing, and she will be able to protect his heart. Oscar is in complete shock and confusion and can't even find the words to say. Romeo says their captain is talking nonsense again. Griffith can't believe they are all the same age. Rio notices that they all bought the exact same doll. Oscar asks if they all have the same dolls now, and Rio replies that the others almost started crying because they had dolls like theirs. Romeo begins to deny everything, but the captain looks more trusting in Oscar's eyes. Everyone falls asleep in their beds, and everyone has their doll rabbits lying next to them. The time traveler looks at her rabbit with a turquoise bow. She likes the fact that this toy is hers, her own, which will always be with her. She remembers that they all now have a toy rabbit, each one their own, with a bow that matches the color of their eyes. The time traveler does not envy Juliana's doll at all. There was good news. The priest finally installed another bed in their room. According to Rio, this will help them reduce the damage caused by the sleeping Romeo's rampages, while Calix says that it won't be possible to completely prevent them. Romeo complains about their rudeness and says that he only kicked someone a couple of times or fell out of bed, suggesting that everyone should go to bed already. But the guy notices something in the window. He tells everyone else about the coming downpour. Oscar looks out the window as Griffith goes to turn off the lights. The candle no longer burns as the captain bids everyone good night. But suddenly, terribly strong thunderstorms begin. Romeo was sleeping on the edge of the bed again and began to fall off it, flying onto the floor. He immediately comes to his senses after a strong blow, but his attention is focused on someone else's crying and sobbing. The guy looks at someone else's bed and realizes that something bad has happened and the Crown Prince's help is urgently needed. Rio was sleeping and didn't expect anything bad. But suddenly it will be Romeo's loud and sudden cry. He says in a hurry that something bad happened to Oscar again, just like that time. Rio asks if he's having another attack, and Romeo replies that he can't breathe properly and that they should hurry. They come to Oscar's room together. Calix and Griffith are already standing with a burning lantern. Rio immediately notices everything and cannot waste a minute. In front of him, he sees Oscar, who is shaking all over with fear, sitting next to his bed. The Crown Prince immediately runs to him, calling him by name, just like during his last attack. The captain puts his hand on his face and says that he is next to him now. Rio asks him to look at him, to look into his eyes. He tells him to breathe slowly and carefully because everything is fine now. The captain says to repeat after him. Oscar succeeds, which Rio immediately shares with him. The guy comes to his senses a little and the terribly strong tremor stops. Oscar says it's because of the heavy rain and thunderstorm. He can only say the words Mom and Dad, but even this is completely enough for the newcomer to immediately understand everything without unnecessary explanations. His mother died on a rainy day, which Oscar tells him about, but Rio tells him that there is no need to be afraid of it. It is just rain. Nothing bad will happen. The captain covers Oscar, who has already come to his senses, with a blanket. The traveler did not expect such an immediate effect. She immediately looks at the rabbit that was given to Oscar. Rio holds the doll out to him. He says from now on, if he's scared or anxious, Oscar should talk to that rabbit the way he talks to him. Oscar hugs the rabbit in his arms and looks at his red bow. Everyone else stood nearby and waited for the captain to perform a miracle and save Oscar, even from such an attack. Calix asks if he is possessed by a demon. This immediately irritates the newcomer. She tugs at his cheek and tells him to watch his words. Griffith asks if the captain knows why Oscar is acting like this. Rio starts saying that it's all because of one thing. It's hard for him to talk about it, and he exhales heavily. The Crown Prince promises to tell them. Romeo already knows everything. Oscar becomes very calm as he looks at the stuffed rabbit, which he hugs with both arms. The lantern illuminates the room as Rio finishes explaining the reason for the attacks, that it is due to injury. He says that everyone is afraid of at least one thing, and these words make Romeo tremble. Griffith asks what the captain fears most. The time traveler understands that she is most afraid of hunger, but this will sound strange. She replies that she is afraid of hunger among the inhabitants of the Empire. Calix says that this is complete nonsense, but the captain will be the most wonderful emperor in the world, and Griffith expected this from the Crown Prince because he is not like the others. Oscar admits that he is afraid of his father, and Romeo of demons. Griffith says that he is not afraid of anything, although the time traveler herself understands that he would not say so, even if he was very afraid. Rio asks about Calix's fear. He replied with pompous pride that he was not even afraid of the wolves sent by his uncle, and fought with them, while the newcomer thought that it would be worth being at least a little afraid. Oscar immediately says that he knows what Calix is afraid of, even though he tries to appear fearless to those around him. The guy says that Calix's fear is girls. After all, the last time the girl spoke to him, he panicked and ran away. Calix is all red with shame and awkwardness because of this story, shouting that he is not afraid of girls at all. He demands that Oscar take back his words, but he is abruptly stopped by Griffith and Romeo. At that very moment, the newcomer notices this. Everyone starts looking at the captain with surprise. Rio laughs very sweetly at all this fuss and their childish and naive squabbles. They all calm down and breathe a sigh of relief. Calix says, "You don't have to laugh so loudly, but the story is too funny for Rio." The captain says that they learned what others were afraid of, and Romeo felt better, realizing the normality of his fears. Although not all fears are completely clear, like the fearless Calix and Griffith, who will never tell anything. Romeo suggests that they talk about things that are pleasant for them. Rio likes the idea of talking about favorite animals, food, books and plays, favorite artists. Griffith begins to think seriously, and Calix remembers too many things to say one thing at once. Romeo and Oscar support the general enthusiasm and begin to remember everything. That night, they discussed a lot of things. What they liked, what they didn't like, what they had in common, as if trying to fill the gap, while they didn't know each other, laughing loudly, not hearing the rain and thunder. That day marked the creation of an even stronger bond of friendship between the five of them, and they celebrated each other's birthdays from then on. And they spent the holidays of each empire together, remaining the same, as if nothing had changed except their rapprochement. Oscar and Griffith remained calm, but Calix was furious at the antics of Romeo, who did not lose his mischievous character. They all celebrated each season together and made snowmen in winter. The time traveler herself did not notice how 2 years had flown by until someone again approached her, addressing her as Prince Rio. The girl asks to accept an envelope with a heart drawn on it from her. Rio thanks her and smiles sweetly at her, promising to keep her gift. She screams with joy while the other girls are also embarrassed. They discuss writing more letters because Prince Rio is very kind and charming. The time traveler enters their room, where a whole mountain of envelopes was already lying on the table. She puts another one on the table. The captain is immediately called out to, and he immediately turns towards the voice. Calix asks how Rio isn't tired of all the letters, and Griffith asks if he went to the library like he planned. The captain replies that he has already gone, and the two of them have already finished the fencing lesson, which makes Calix terribly hungry, for which Griffith reproaches him because he ran like a wild horse. Griffith says the others are delayed in the showers, but should be here soon. Immediately upon the captain's appearance, a joyful Oscar greets Rio. Romeo, who came with him, also immediately rejoices at the quick appearance of their leader. The Crown Prince doesn't have time to finish his thought before Oscar hands him a gift. He gives him another letter. Calix is immediately shocked, but Romeo tells him that the priests asked him to deliver this letter. Rio thanks him for this and begins to read the letter itself from the envelope. But his face immediately changes from embarrassment and interest to dull and empty eyes, and his mood seems to drop to 0. The time traveler wonders in her mind if they are all growing up too fast, everyone except her. Although she lives and eats well here, she still hasn't grown much. Even Oscar, who was so cute and small, has already outgrown her. It was humiliating for the captain of the 4 future heroes. While the girl was resting, citing her poor health, the others were learning fencing, the feeling that only she was lagging behind. Rio tells them to change their clothes quickly. It's almost lunchtime. Everyone immediately goes to change clothes, discussing their training. The time traveler decides to read where this letter was sent to her from. The letter turns out to be from the Auraria Empire, and also from Emperor Ridios. Her interest was awakened again, and she began to read what the Emperor had written to her. This immediately brought her into a terrible state of terror. The time traveler was left alone in her large room, where over the past 2 years an incredible number of events had taken place, bringing their entire team closer together. With a sense of sadness and despair, the girl held the letter that had killed all joy in her immediately after just reading it. Everyone else immediately calls her to dinner as usual. They are already getting ready. Rio just looks at them sideways without saying a single word in response. He just turns around and hurries back to his room, not wanting to talk to them. Calix doesn't understand this and tries to call him again. The guy catches up with the captain, grabs him by the shoulder, and asks why he is leaving like this. At that moment, Rio abruptly pushes his friend's hand away from his shoulder, telling him not to bother him, which even Calix himself could not have expected. He doesn't understand it at all and gets scared. Oscar immediately runs after him, asking if something happened, very worried about such a detached behavior of the captain. The guy says they'll do anything to help him in any way, but the captain just orders him to shut up and not talk to him. He doesn't want to fully comprehend his words. He is horrified by what he hears from Rio's lips. Romeo asks what came over him, because they are all just worried and want to help. Griffith says it's not like him to act like that without any explanation. The time traveler begins to think that it could be like her at all, because they know nothing at all. She moves further and further away from them. Oscar still calls the captain's name with sorrow and hope for the best. The time traveler enters her room, closing the door with her body, and tries to catch her breath. The girl is left completely alone in a huge room, where almost everything reminds her of the time spent with her friends. She begins to think that things can't get any worse. The Emperor reminded her of her duty and ordered her to behave normally. There was no need for a letter, since the magic of silence would not let her talk anyway, but he must be very nervous. But this was enough for him to be able to remind her of her situation. The time traveler is forced to play the role of a fake Crown Prince Rio, completely hiding all real information about herself. Over these 2 years, she spent a lot of time with her subordinates, they had a lot of conversations, they managed to become very good friends. But the girl could not tell them that very truth, even tell them about her real gender, name, and her status. Everything was a lie. A year later, when their paths diverge, they receive news that Crown Prince Rio is dead. She thought that everything would be easier after these 3 years, but she could not even predict that Oscar and Romeo would be so close to each other, thanks to her, would become closer to her. Calix will show his kindness and care, and Griffith will be more open with the whole team. The time they spent together was so incredibly fun that at some point the newcomer began to dream that these days would never end. She is simply a fake of a completely different person, the role of which she was forced to play, so deeply mired in this lie that she almost forgot about their future. Romeo will not be able to believe that the captain is dead. Oscar will be bawling his eyes out as soon as he reads the letter about this news. Griffith will clutch the letter with the tragic news in despair. When Calix learns of Rio's death, he starts beating walls out of sheer anger. But all the subordinates turn to the captain and force him to come out of his thoughts. The whole team looks at him with the utmost concern, and Rio tries to start a conversation with them, but starts stuttering due to worries. Romeo asks him if he really thinks they can just leave him, seeing his condition. The Crown Prince again demands that he shut his mouth and just leave him alone and in peace. Oscar is the most worried and says that their captain is acting very strangely, and they are just worried about him and want to help. Romeo asks to tell them if something serious happened. Calix is already yelling at him, asking the captain what's wrong with him, what he's supposed to think if he doesn't want to tell anything. Griffith notes that, whatever the case, he is clearly doing this on purpose. Rio is reminded of the importance of sharing your problems with your loved ones. Oscar says it was the captain who taught him to learn from his problems. He takes the Crown Prince's hands, telling him that he can rely on them if he is having a hard time. The guy talks about his desire to be someone Rio can count on. This shocks the newcomer, who expected that her relationships with all her subordinates would become terrible, but it turned out exactly the opposite. Oscar is very surprised and does not believe what he sees in front of him. Rio starts to cry, her cheeks red with embarrassment. Oscar begins to listen to him attentively until the fear in his eyes changes to surprise. The captain begins to say that it is all because of him, and from his words, everyone else gets scared. He starts crying even harder. Rio asks that even if he dies one day, he wants them not to be sad. Oscar's eyes immediately go blank with the most terrible fear because of the words his captain had just said. Romeo asks what the Crown Prince is talking about. He hands him his handkerchief to wipe away his tears, asking if it's because their time together is soon coming to an end, and that's why Rio is so sad. Calix shows them the symbol on their hand that they all have, reminding them that they will all soon be able to see each other in the same squad of demon hunters. Rio's hysteria doesn't stop. He doesn't even take the handkerchief that Romeo is offering him, and after the mention of the demon hunter squad, he only gets worse. Calix promises that his older brother will protect them all, even if it is the most dangerous test in the entire empire. The guy promises that he will not let anyone die, but the captain says that he probably won't even be able to join the squad because he might die before that. Griffith is horrified by these words, but is the first to continue the conversation. He asks if anyone has taken aim at the Crown Prince. Rio replies that people are hunting for the throne he is supposed to inherit, and besides, his body is too weak. So even if he can't become part of the dragon hunters, let them not be sad. They should all be careful in battle and return together. Calix and Griffith looked at him silently, not understanding why this had come over him now. But the captain immediately hears the answer that this will not happen. Oscar, with tears in his eyes, begs not to die. The guy hates death with all his heart and losing his loved ones because of death, which makes Rio cry even more. Oscar begins to cry harder and harder, out of fear of losing the captain. The time traveler looks at him with a completely tear-stained face. In front of her now, he seems like a crybaby with a very sensitive soul. But later, Oscar Hresvelg in the storyline will obtain a demonic sword that has been sealed since ancient times and will become immortal. A one-armed berserker in the original story who effortlessly wields a giant sword that others cannot lift, Calix Asgard has become a mercenary king. Griffith of Nicaea awakened divine powers far superior to those of the Saints of Kreutz and became the bearer of the sacred sword. By possessing the dragon's heart, he becomes the youngest person in history to build a magical tower, becoming the word mage, Romeo Roseberry. And Relia, full of lies, the one who has nothing. The time traveler is incredibly happy simply because she was able to become friends with these heroes of the future. Now she is truly proud of it. But at the same time, she is terribly hurt by Oscar's tears, who was able to open up his feelings to her and tell her about the problems that were on his soul, and by the fact that Romeo was still able to show his kind side to her. Even Calix stopped being so rude, began to worry and care. Griffith showed his excitement more openly. Rio says that her subordinates will become part of great stories even if she is no longer in this world, so let them not be sad. Some time passes, the subordinates come to the captain. Calix asks if he is crying again. The time traveler is very angry that they decided to tease their own captain, and calls them in her thoughts a bunch of tactless idiots. She begins to think that she has completely gone crazy, lost her mind, and does not understand how she can show herself to them after such a scene. But still, they have become more prepared for Rio's future death, so it should be okay, because it will shock them less than sudden death. Calix continues to call the captain a crybaby little Rio, and the newcomer promises herself that she will not let him get away with it. Suffering alone wouldn't help matters anyway, and she had about 6 months left to live in the temple. The time traveler hugs her toy rabbit and decides to create as many pleasant memories as possible while there is still time, because they will never meet each other again. They shout through the door that today they will celebrate Griffith's birthday. If the captain does not intend to miss the important holiday, then he should leave his room. Rio makes an excuse that he accidentally fell asleep and immediately hurries to them, saying goodbye to his toy rabbit, and says that he will leave the room in a minute. Everyone congratulates Griffith on his birthday and brings a big cake with strawberries on top. They hand him envelopes, each of them stylized in a special way, and giving letters to each other on their birthdays has already become their special tradition. Calix says it would be nice to get out again and buy gifts, but Romeo replies that it will not be so easy to do now, due to the knights assigned to accompany him. Oscar calls their walk then a miracle, and Rio says that Romeo was very reckless then. The guy starts to deny this and reminds everyone that the captain invited them to go for a walk. But Rio brushes it off by saying that it was a long time ago, and this makes the blonde angry. Romeo tells him not to regret it later, because today is the last day the captain can treat him like this. These words greatly surprise the traveler. He promises that tomorrow Rio will thank him for all the care and kindness, even though some things were supposed to be delivered today. But something unexpected happened. The Crown Prince asks what the blonde is talking about, and Oscar reminds him that tomorrow is the birthday of someone very dear to Rio. Calix also remembers this and confirms everything. He himself heard that this day is the day after his birthday, but he cannot remember whose. Romeo suggests that it might be a secret girl. Rio immediately yells at him and refutes this assumption, becoming very embarrassed by these words. He says it's just someone who is a very important friend to him. Oscar asks excitedly if this friend is more important to their captain than they are. The Crown Prince replies to his worried friend that everything is not as he might have thought. Rio starts to tell more about him, while excitement is already taking over him. They knew each other since childhood. Oscar is very worried. It is clearly noticeable from him that the time traveler sees him. The captain says that they shouldn't be sad about this, and Oscar is also his close and very dear friend. He pats him on the head and Oscar calms down. They all start the party together. Calix shares his impressions of the cake they prepared for the birthday boy. Romeo cuts the cake and serves it to everyone on plates. The time traveler tries to enjoy the moment when she can eat delicious cake and be surrounded by dear friends, but after returning to the zone, all this will disappear. Everyone is already asleep, except for one Rio who is sitting at the table. The time traveler thinks about how she will spend the remaining time in the temple is very important, but she also needs to think about what she will do upon returning to the Empire. And among other things, the biggest problem remains how to prevent her death from drowning. Only by extreme caution can an accident be avoided. But the real problems are beyond her control: the current Emperor Ridios, the death of Crown Prince Rio, and the return of the former Emperor Perseus to the throne. Another problem is the participation of all four in the hunt for the dragon, because in the battle with him, Calix will receive an incurable wound. Calix, during the battle with the dragon, would deliver a fatal blow with a two-handed sword that only Calix could wield. Embedded in its center was a stone, a holy relic sought by the Order of Kreutz. The power of this sword alone was enough to pierce the dragon's scales. Calix was able to deflect the dragon's attacks and repel them, wearing down its strength. He managed to master the sword so much that even the dragon's magic could not crush his strength and desire to protect his loved ones. After a fierce battle, Calyx slew the dragon with that very sword. And so the dragon fell and peace was restored, but Calyx had to pay for peace with his life to save everyone else. But before that, the dragon managed to inflict serious injuries on him. Calyx pierced his scales, but the dragon's fire burned through his body during the final attack, the skin and bones being pulled apart in a horrific manner. If it weren't for Griffith's divine power, he would have lost his life here and now, but thanks to his desperate healing attempts, most of the wounds were healed. But his eyes, which were the hallmark of all people from the Asgard Empire, could not be returned. At that time, the inhabitants of the Empire, who had long suffered under the tyranny of the Emperor, dreamed of a new ruler who would correct their situation and become worthy of this title. They hoped that Calyx, returning as a hero after defeating the dragon, would overthrow the tyrant and save them, but they were overcome with wild terror upon his return. Parents covered their children's eyes so that they would not see this spectacle and be frightened. Calyx returned, but he was seen as a completely different person, one that was feared. It was all because of his eyes. The symbol of their imperial family was golden eyes, which were called the eyes of the Son of Heaven, capable of seeing everything hidden. But after losing his sight, Calyx's eyes took on a mysterious new color, and people began to avoid him, claiming that he was cursed by the Dragon of Light, fated him as a hero to his face, but shunned him behind his back. No one wanted Calyx to become emperor anymore. Despite this attitude, he was not offended, did not seek a reward for saving the world, and in order not to frighten people, he began to hide his eyes. However, the original protagonist Juliana was ready to console Calyx and support him. She told him that she didn't think he was cursed, and that his eyes had saved everyone in this world, and that could never be a curse. From that very day, he also became a fish in Juliana's pond, but this love did not happen, and Calyx turned away from everything, going on a journey around the world. But it was as if hands, eyes, countries, family, love, and friendship had never existed for him, and he himself remained alone. But now Calyx is smiling happily like the stupidest fool in the whole wide world. The time traveler can no longer look at him the same way, knowing that he will suffer such a difficult fate that it is almost impossible to avoid. Now the guy laughs louder than anyone else and smiles more often than anyone else, which makes it very difficult to imagine him in despair. There is no way to change Calyx's fate in the original story, because no one but him could have dealt the killing blow to the dragon. He will not be able to avoid a huge number of injuries, and the dragon's scales can only be pierced with all possible force, which only he has is so enormous that it is capable of doing this. The guy said that even if he knew in advance there was no other way to console his saddened comrades, the time traveler thinks that only he could say something like that. No matter how much she thought about it, she couldn't come up with a solution, and the feeling of her helplessness grew stronger and stronger. She doesn't even have magical powers like the main character. Although magic couldn't protect Calyx, the traveler could take care of herself, but she doesn't even feel mana in herself. People with a strong sensitivity to mana could collect it in their body and train. Those who could fill weapons or their bodies with mana were called aura masters. Those who used mana for their techniques and spells were called magicians. The time traveler is sad because she ended up in a novel, but she can't even use a couple of spells. She begins to think about trying to understand at least a little bit about alchemy. Alchemy is a type of magic and a heretical power that is forbidden in this world. People believe that the Philosopher's Stone can fulfill any wish of the one who creates it. Elixir, a legendary potion that can heal any wounds, diseases, or even death, the creation of these two items is the main and most important goal of alchemy. But no alchemist was able to create any of these items. The Kreutz Order forbade even attempts to create them, but the medicines created by the alchemists were sold underground. The time traveler is shaking from the memory that those who get caught doing this will be accused of heresy and will face a trial similar to a witch hunt and execution by burning at the stake, although you can at least make some money from it. She shakes her head to get rid of these thoughts, because there is no point in thinking about powers she does not have. Right now she needs to worry about herself. Waiting for a cold death in the tower is also not a solution. The time traveler does not want to be simply used for a political marriage. She begins to doubt whether she should take advantage of the former emperor's return and escape from the palace forever, since there is a risk of being killed by soldiers. Or you should ask Juliana for salvation, fall at her feet and tearfully beg. Juliana is a kind soul who will not hold a grudge against anyone and always helps those in need. She can help with food and offer any assistance. But if the girl falls into the hands of Emperor Perseus, Cedric, or Damien, she will be immediately killed before she has a chance to talk to Juliana. The traveler has an idea of what she can do. She remembers a large hut in the middle of the forest near the imperial palace, which was the secret hideout of the former empress and wife of Perseus, where Elizabeth, being a magician, could devote herself entirely to research, and this shelter was built for her by Perseus. The hut must have been left with a lot of useful gadgets that Elizabeth had created, and emergency rations that had been magically enchanted to keep them alive, at least in the original story. Perseus, seeing Juliana's abilities in magic, remembered his dead wife and gave her the entire hut. But if the traveler manages to get there before it ends up in Juliana's hands, then she will be able to get some food there. She decides to steal food and magical devices without anyone noticing, so that she can definitely escape from the palace. The girl falls asleep with the hope that she will be able to escape, even if it will be difficult and everyone will treat her like a cowardly thief. She is obliged to try. Even though there is no one on her side, the traveler promises herself that she will be okay and will be able to overcome everything. She falls asleep hugging her stuffed rabbit, thinking that she will find her own way to survive. The whole company looks at the special feathers that Romeo brought for them. His father made them, and the boy himself brought them to them. The Roseberry Empire itself is a land of jewels and magic. With the help of these feathers, they will be able to communicate from any distance. Romeo shows everyone how to write with such pens. Everyone else immediately has a letter appear in their hands out of nowhere, which shocks Oscar and Rio the most. Calix and Griffith were also very surprised by this. A letter from Romeo appeared in their hands, in which he writes to use his gift with gratitude. If one of them writes a letter, then they will appear in everyone else's. He suggests writing letters to each other even when they are separated. The stone in the magic pen has magical powers. If it is pulled out, then it will be impossible to send or receive letters. Reo calls it incredible and is very happy about such a gift. The blonde smugly reminds him that he was talking about this yesterday, that everyone will praise his resourcefulness. Let them continue to compliment him. The traveler understands that she will be able to continue communicating with them until the official prince officially dies, which makes her very happy. Romeo says that this is the end of his gift presentation and suggests eating cake. Oscar decides to light the candles, and Calix suggests blowing them out for the captain because it is his dear friend's birthday. Everyone starts congratulating the captain's close friend, but the time traveler doesn't dare blow out the candles and looks at the strawberry cake. Everyone asks Reo not to hesitate and blow out the candles, but he cannot stop looking at the candle flames. The captain blows out the fire. Calix and everyone else starts congratulating him and clapping their hands. He doesn't understand what happened again and is very surprised. Rio starts crying again. Calix doesn't understand him at all every time, and Oscar immediately asks what happened, whether the captain suddenly became ill, being very worried about him. The captain smiles and replies that everything is fine, wiping the tears from his cheeks. The time traveler goes into her thoughts and realizes that they celebrated Relia's birthday, but Romeo says that Rio should get his own scarf. The girl was very grateful to them and cried with joy, although everyone else tried to somehow help her calm down. Rio, with a very sweet smile, thanks everyone for these congratulations. This surprises and confuses everyone a little. Romeo doesn't dare ask, but it's clear that he's worried. The time traveler thinks about the fact that next year she will spend her birthday alone again. They want to ask the captain something, and this causes Rio to come out of his thoughts. Romeo starts talking about a dear person whose birthday we are now planning. He asks if this is someone he will never be able to meet again, maybe his late mother. The traveler cannot find the words to answer anything. Calix exhales heavily. Romeo looks away. Oscar and Griffith are silent and also worried. Rio says that's not the case at all. The time traveler realizes that all of her subordinates also lost their mothers in early childhood. Oscar lost his mother when his father killed her. Calix lost both parents immediately after birth. Griffith never knew his real mother, only his stepmother, who hated him terribly. Romeo's mother committed suicide, completely forgetting about her son, who saw it all at the same moment. The traveler remembers that Relia also lost her mother early. She wipes the tears from her cheeks. The captain sits down on the sofa in front of the table, which is already set. He begins to vigorously eat huge chunks of cake without even cutting it, much to the surprise of everyone else. Oscar gets scared and asks what happened to him. Romeo asks if they don't hurry, the captain will eat the cake alone, and Calix says that Rio is capable of that too. They all start eating the strawberry cake. Everyone is enjoying the beautiful sunset, and this is what the team gathered for late in the evening. Calix starts to joke, saying that Rio is about to cry again because he was so moved by the beautiful sunset. Romeo starts looking for his handkerchief, and Oscar doesn't understand that they are just making fun of him and starts to get seriously worried. The captain orders them to stop clowning around and hits them on the tops of their heads. Calix asks if Rio is sure he won't cry, since he did so every time he had the chance. The crown prince, clearly irritated and tired, says that he will not cry. He decided not to cry at all anymore, and there is a very important reason for this. Rio says that they don't have much time left together. Romeo looks at the captain in surprise. This is too precious a time for all of them, and the captain doesn't want to waste it on tears. Oscar thinks about how he wants to do so many things with them, and see so many beautiful things that they can't even imagine. Griffith smiles a little at the corners of his lips, but he also wants to laugh with everyone else until everyone is exhausted. Calix looks at them all carefully. The captain's request to remember him only with a smile on his face immediately changes his look. Rio asks them to smile more often so that he can fill them with such happiness. Because all these days were full of joy from the fact that they spent them all together. The carriages arrive at the temple. The priestess calls out to Crown Prince Rio and says that the escort from the Auraria Empire has arrived. He straightens his collar. The traveler says that she will be there soon and understands that the day of their separation has come. The carriages were already waiting for all the children to return to their empires. Rio starts crying again from all the emotions that have come over him, but he is asked to stop. Calix reminds them that they will see each other in a few years and that they need to stop crying. Oscar also begins to shed tears and asks them all to write letters more often. Griffith says he will miss them all very much. Romeo supports Calix's advice and says that he is beginning to get irritated by this atmosphere. Rio and Oscar continue to cry relentlessly, which only makes everyone else sadder. Romeo looks towards all the carriages that are waiting for them to leave and decides to improve the atmosphere. He hugs Griffith, who is always the least expecting of this gesture. The guy hugs Calix, who has become more relaxed during the 3 years he spent in the temple. Oscar also gets his consoling hugs. Romeo wishes them to stay healthy. If something happens, let them write letters immediately. All his experiences and sentimentality greatly surprise the newcomer. She remembers their first meeting when he said how much he hated each of them and starts laughing really loudly. Romeo is surprised that Rio suddenly started laughing after crying. Calix and Griffith begin to doubt that their captain is okay, which makes him confused. Rio begins to jokingly hit Calix, who shouts that Griffith should get what he said. The captain says that there are things that should never change, and this makes the subordinate laugh. But the Crown Prince begins to speak to him seriously, which immediately makes Calix listen attentively. Rio says that there were times when he was angry with him, but he never hated him. He always felt comfortable talking to him. He thinks that's why he was especially open with him. The captain asks him to always be careful even after returning home, and to be especially careful with his uncle. This embarrasses him to the point of red cheeks, but Calix promises to follow his advice. Griffith is surprised by Rio's words, that at the very beginning of their friendship he thought he was keeping his distance from them. But the reason they were able to succeed was because he was there to support them all. The captain was counting on him, believing that everything would be fine because Griffith was there. Rio asks him to beware of those selfish people who want to take advantage of his power when he returns home, and he says not to worry about it as long as the smile itself says it all instead of words. The Crown Prince smiles back at him. The captain approaches Oscar, saying that he has worked very hard for 3 years. The guy didn't run away from difficult memories, he bravely endured them. He persistently practiced his speech. He is a truly wonderful person who did all this. No matter how far apart they are, as long as there are dolls, they are together. Rio asks if he understands, and Oscar, in tears, promises to take care of the doll and not get sick. He smiles at him with very warm joy for his success. The captain says that Romeo is the last one left and exhales heavily. He orders him to take care of being a little nicer, especially to the newcomers. He has nothing more to say for him. Romeo is shocked by this treatment. He immediately swings his fist at the captain's head, but suddenly Rio notices that his subordinate did not hit him. The blonde himself begins to shed small tears. He promises to try to do everything for this and hugs his captain tightly. This touches him very much, and Rio thanks him for saving him from the pond on the day they met. He calls Romeo a very brave and kind man, which only makes him cry more. The blonde watches as the captain's suitcase and bags are loaded into the carriage. Everyone says goodbye to Rio as if in one voice. They say that they will definitely meet again. The captain finds himself in the carriage. There are still tears in his eyes. He can't stop looking at his friends. The traveler only understands more clearly that they will never see each other again. She carries a curse that will make her vomit blood and kill her if her secret is revealed, which will be on her even after the emperor's death, as Prince Rio will never meet her friends again. Rio thanks them for all the time they spent together at the temple and bids them farewell. The carriages are already moving far away from the temple and evening is approaching. Calix goes home, but he feels almost no joy about it. But as soon as he remembers their last conversation, he immediately begins to smile. The guy told his friends about his plan to become a mercenary because he is worried that his uncle will not leave him alone, so he wants to move on his own. Griffith tries to dissuade his friend from this dangerous undertaking, but Calix says that being born into the imperial family does not mean that you will remain a member of it until death. Romeo is very surprised by his words that even without the title, Calix will remain who he is. Rio asks if he really plans to become a mercenary. The captain says that his subordinate has thought everything through well, and he is confident that he will be able to become the best mercenary of all. The guy smiles, remembering these words, but suddenly he remembers his strange dream from yesterday. In this dream, he had to relive the day when he was attacked by wolves, and Calix lost one arm. No matter how hard he tried, the boy could not find the captain in his dreams. It's as if they're telling him what would happen without him. Calix doesn't understand what kind of dream this could be. He remembers that upon returning to his homeland, his uncle and aunt will be waiting for him. They will try desperately to drive him away. But the guy is not afraid of anything, not understanding the reasons for this fearlessness, and looks at his mark. Calix realizes that his lack of fear comes from the captain's faith in him. He repeats Rio's words to himself and says that he is not afraid of anything, even if everyone is against him. The knight reports to the emperor that Relia has been sent to the eastern tower where she was originally located, and asks what they should do next. The emperor replies that she should continue to live there because she could still be useful to them. They need to place the knights at a distance so that they would not reveal themselves and report what is happening. The time traveler, who no longer needs to pretend to be the crown prince, returns to her tower. She is not at all happy about her return to this place, which the girl no longer considers her home. Her hands begin to shake from nerves and the realization that she will have to live here again in terrible conditions. But now the days of simply enduring are over. Now she needs to prepare to escape from this nightmare. The girl writes a letter to her friends, lying that she has such a life in a mansion with servants and good conditions, which are much better than in the temple. In fact, she has small remnants of stored food. She writes to them that they would be surprised by her big and comfortable bed, but in reality she put everything on the floor. Her hair has already grown out, so she has to put it in a ponytail. It's getting very cold in the tower, and even her jacket doesn't save her. But Relia was glad that no one had stolen her bag. The bag contained food that she had secretly taken for herself, and winter clothes were also here. There was a toy rabbit in the bag too. She is very happy about this, but the room is still terribly cold. The girl begins to put branches in the fireplace to light them and warm herself up a little. After living in the temple, she developed a habit of having the priests light a fire in the oven every morning. She begins to yearn for all the comforts of life in the temple. She is happy that she managed to start a fire, but suddenly gray smoke starts coming out of it. There were wet branches in there, but it was better than freezing to death. The girl decides to collect more firewood before the snow covers everything, and besides, it is much colder inside the tower than she thought. It's good that at least there is water in the tower. It seems to her that the water is heated by magic, but she doesn't know how to use it. She originally planned to visit Elizabeth's secret cabin immediately upon returning home, but her plans changed dramatically. She began to feel as if Emperor Radios had assigned her a guard. If she wants to take magical items or food with her, she might be suspected of something strange and then even killed for it. All she can do is wait until the time comes. By spring, no one will be watching her like that because the real Rio will be poisoned by Radios's comrades. Soon after, the rebels, led by Perseus, invade the imperial palace. This will be real chaos, which will be hard for the traveler to remember. She can't stick her neck out until the emperor changes and the situation is resolved because Perseus isn't as wary of her as Radios. But if Relia were not interesting, she would be much freer than she is now. Once Crown Prince Rio officially dies, she will no longer be able to send letters. There was no response to her letter, which means the others are still asleep. The girl goes into her thoughts and memories of her friends. She decides to go get some firewood while no one has responded to her letter. The area around the tower was very nondescript. The time traveler begins to collect small branches that would not be heavy to carry. The girl begins to think that she would like to stay in the temple for the full 10 years, and not for 3 years. Now she really was alone. But suddenly he stumbles. She falls and drops all the branches from her hands. The girl looks at her hands, which are scratched by the ground. It's hard for her to go through all this again, but she needs to collect her thoughts. With shaking hands, she begins to collect all the fallen branches. The time traveler decides to start making precise plans for the future. With the arrival of spring, the emperor will change, so she will need to go to Elizabeth's hut to get food and magic items. The girl hopes that Elizabeth won't be angry that she's taking it away from her. You also need to avoid being seen by Juliana and her brothers as much as possible. The time traveler is not going to repeat her apologies to the princess 100%, as it was in the book. When the moment comes, she will need to escape. In the novel, it all ended with her death in the pond, and if she stayed here, she would be sold, and she would marry this man. She has no intention of entering into a diplomatic marriage, so she needs to escape before then. Suddenly, she notices a sharp change in the weather. It has already started snowing, which means we need to hurry. Snow begins to pound the windows in the tower. The burning stove makes it much warmer. The girl comes out of the bath and is surprised that she is still cold, but not as cold as without a fire in the stove. She notices a snowstorm outside the window and praises herself for collecting a lot of firewood. But suddenly something happens. A reply to her letter arrived. The girl immediately begins to read it carefully. Oscar wrote that Rio is a great guy. He is glad that the captain is okay, and he is doing well too. The boy was very worried, but the nightmares no longer tormented him, all thanks to the toy he gave him. The traveler is very pleased to read his letter. Suddenly another letter appears. Calix writes that he is afraid that someone from his family will find out about the toy. The very thought makes him feel terribly ashamed. That's why he has to hide it under his pillow. Griffith asks him if he's been idle and hopes that Calix remembers who bought him the toy. He himself looks at his rabbit, which is safely kept behind glass. Romeo writes that the temple was much better and more interesting. The blonde offers to tame our cruel dragon, saying that it sounds very tempting. The time traveler laughs and tells herself that everyone is the same as before. But she becomes very sad. The girl lies down under the blanket and plans to write a letter tomorrow. She hugs the rabbit and falls asleep. The traveler is left completely alone. Only the rabbit saves her from terrible despair. A snowstorm is raging outside and hitting the windows. There is very little firewood left for kindling. There are a lot of letters on the table. There are fewer and fewer food supplies left. But the snow has already begun to melt, which surprises the girl because it is snowing heavily in Auraria. When the wind got so strong that she couldn't even go outside, the time traveler seriously thought about what to do next. She goes outside and is glad that the snow melted before she ran out of food and firewood. Suddenly, the girl realizes one thing. Nobody is watching her. This is because she is not such an important character that she needs to be watched in heavy snowfall. The time traveler hopes that she can follow her and no one else will, although she should not relax. She needs to gradually increase the radius of her hikes. The atmosphere in the Auraria Empire is tense. One of the maids asks the other if she has anything to do right now. She asks her to help. The servant understands that she has interrupted someone else's conversation and immediately begins to apologize. The woman says everything is fine and she relies on her. The maid immediately asks if the person she spoke with is one of His Majesty's trusted confidants. But she doesn't continue talking about it, asking if he knows why the situation has been tense lately, because rebellions have begun in the province, and she was ordered to protect Crown Prince Rio.